Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out to our Committee of Adjustment meeting. This is a hearing of the Committee of Adjustment for the Town of Pelham. Everyone present will be given an opportunity on the application to be heard. Please address your comments through the chair. This public meeting has been called to satisfy the requirements of the Planning Act and Council bylaws. Notice of this meeting has been given by prepaid first-class mail to all persons listed as owners in the last revised assessment roll within 60 meters, 200 feet of the subject properties. In addition, a public notice sign has been posted on the lands. Agencies commenting on applications may request that certain conditions be imposed should an application be approved. Voicing objections to these conditions will not adversely affect the committee's decision. The purpose of the application and relative correspondence will be heard, following which the applicant will be given an opportunity to address the application. Any person concerned with the application will then be given an opportunity to speak. Please state your name and your mailing address for the record. At the conclusion of the discussion, the committee will render a decision and advise of any applicable conditions. Specific wording for conditions will be determined by the committee following the public portion of this hearing. All interested parties are invited to be present. Copies of decisions will be mailed to the applicant or agent and to any other person who files a written request. There are colored forms on the back desk over there. You could fill one of those out and you will then receive copies of the decisions. Any person, corporation, or public body has the right to appeal either the decision itself or the conditions of consent to the local appeal body within 20 days of the decision for minor variances and within 20 days of the mailing of the decision for consent applications. Today's panel includes, to my far left, Bernie Law, to my immediate left, Bill Sheldon, to my immediate right, Holly Wilford, who's our secretary. She's a deputy clerk of the town of Pelham, and Sarah Leach will be running our audio-visual from the podium. Does any member of this panel have a pecuniary interest in accordance with the municipal conflict and any of the applications to be considered at this hearing? If no, yes or no? Bernie?
I do not.
Bill? And neither do I. Madam Secretary, are there any requests for withdrawal or adjournment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there have been no requests for withdrawal or adjournment. However, you may perhaps wish to hear the 20 Allen Crescent files last and have the consent B9 and B10 and B11 heard first.
With the indulgence of the committee, I would like to do B9, B10, B12 firstly, and then we'll tackle B11, which is the 20 Allen Crescent application. Are there any objections from the members of the panel? Hearing none, let's proceed with application B9. Is there anybody representing the applicant for B9? Mr. Highcoop, please state your name.
Hi, my name is William Highcoop, a planner with Upper Canada Consultants, representing the owners of 711 and 717 Quaker Road.
Can we proceed with the, Madam Secretary?
Yes.
Read the summary.
Application for consent, file B9/2019P, 711 Quaker Road. The subject parcel shown as Part 4 on the attached sketch is an interior parcel of land situated 61.14 meters south of Quaker Road, lying west of Clare Avenue, in the town of Pelham. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and to convey 2,182.97 meters square of land, Part 4, to merge with the abutting property to the east, Part 5, 701 Quaker Road, for residential use. Part 3 is to be retained for the continued residential use of the single detached dwelling known as 711 Quaker Road. Note, B10/2019P is being considered concurrently. To date, the following comments have been received. Building Department, no comments. Public Works Department, no comments. Bell Canada, no objections. Public comments and response. Does not support the boundary adjustment applications because of lack of information regarding future development of parts 2, 4, and 5. How many units would be created for each of the parts? Unknown. Is there only one access point? Unknown. Is the roadway legal size? Will it be accessible for emergency vehicles? There is no roadway proposed with this application. Are there building setback regulations? Yes. Planning staff are of the opinion that the proposal applies current planning and development goals regarding future intensification of land to provide for the appropriate infill development, making more efficient use of the existing urban lands whereas suitable to do so. The severance will be better position the lands for future subdivision or condominium development in a more efficient manner, which will not negatively affect the development ability of the balance of the lands. The proposed severance should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regards to traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. In planning staff opinion, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to provincial, regional, and local plans. Planning staff recommend that consent file B9/2019P be granted. The following conditions are suggested: that the applicant merge Part 4 with Parts 2 and 5 concurrently, provide the Secretary-Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject parcel, together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for the use in the issuance of the Certificate of Consent. Provide the final certification fee of $395, payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary-Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions of consent shall be borne by the applicant.
Mr. Highcoop, do you have any comments to make with regard to the planning report or anything additional you wish to speak and tell the committee?
I have a small presentation, just a couple slides that I'd like to go through and highlight exactly what's going on and what we're proposing to do. So if you go to the second slide. So here you can see the survey sketch submitted with the consent applications. You'll notice Part 5 is a larger part that has frontage along Quaker Road. Back in 2016, I went through similar process for consent and created 4 lots along Clare Avenue. The remnant parcel, Part 5, was at that time zoned for RM1 purposes. However, there's existing servicing capacity issues, and since that time, we've been working on doing a storm sewer down Quaker Road. In order to realize those plans that we started working on back in 2016 and 2017, the financial feasibility component really dictated that a larger development was needed to realize that storm sewer construction. So since that time, my client's been working on acquiring additional lands, and that's really what we have before us tonight is a land assembly process so that we can compile more lands. If you go to the next slide, just to show you exactly what's going on, you'll see the existing property lines in red and green. And what we're proposing to do is to implement a new property line off the rear of the dwellings. You can see in yellow. And then the yellow arrows really show that the parts 2 and 4 will be merged with part 5. So there's nothing physically being proposed today. What we have again is that land assembly process, and that will allow us to compile plans for a future development application. That future development application will require a zoning bylaw amendment and a draft plan of vacant land condo. So at this point, I understand and have considered the comments received, but until this consent process and land assembly is completed, can we really put plans together and start that process? So that would be my response to those questions. And then lastly, we feel that, and based on planning staff's opinion and my professional opinion, conforms to the provincial policy, conforms to the town official plan. We agree with the conditions of approval, and this allows us to do that land assembly for future applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hycoop. Do any members of the public wish to make comment on the application? Hearing none, are there any members of the panel that wish to ask Mr. Hycoop some questions?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Can we go back to the magic button? Can we go back to the drawing showing the lot lines in green? And that one. What is the final size of the assembled, should this be approved, what's the final size of the assembly?
I can do, through you, Mr. Chair, I can do some quick math, but we'd have approximately about 10,000 square meters.
100,000 square feet, 2.5 acres. You're looking at a multifamily development?
Of some kind. Through you, Mr. Chair, as I originally indicated, council approved an RM1 zoning on Part 5 previously. If we were to do a future development with Part 2 and 4, which we're proposing to attach to that property today, we would be required to do a zoning bylaw amendment, and we would be required to get a draft approval from council in order to realize that. So this stage is really putting the pieces of the land together so that, number one, we have a more financially feasible development with the servicing I explained at the beginning. And number two, from a Planning Act perspective, we would have a more fulsome development that doesn't chop up the rear of these parcels with having them develop separately. If they develop together, you have a much better efficient plan, a better street design and road layout.
Through you, Mr. Chair, have all the lots on Clare Avenue been sold?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I am not aware of all of them being sold. I am aware of the southerly parcel, this 99 Clare Avenue. I believe there's an existing dwelling on it. As for the other two, 1003 and 1007, I'm not aware of a building permit being issued for those as of yet, but they were previously approved by this committee.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the planning staff, was this application liaised with the fire department?
Through the chair, yes, the fire department circulated all of these applications.
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, so based on the liaison process, the fire department made no comment on a secondary access to this assembled land.
Through the chair, there's no detailed development plan for this property. This is a boundary adjustment. So there's no internal street layout plan. So there's nothing to comment on in terms of second means of egress. But that would come down to the fire and building code ultimately.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if you look at this plan, and if all the lands on Clare are sold, there's no opportunity for a second exit, egress, entrance to this plan. Where do we go from there?
Through the chair, I can't comment on the specifics of the building and fire code, but if there, and it's happened in other developments, if there isn't a second means of egress, then they resort to sprinklering the buildings.
Mr. Hycoop, are you aware of this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I certainly am. And I may add to Curtis's comment, there's no existing or proposed dwellings that at this point in time, under my knowledge of the fire building code, would require that at this point in time. So by no means is this a finished product with a finished design. I think we're taking the first step to getting the land put in place to do something in the future.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's my concern, that if we lay the foundation of a development of 2.5 acres, at 12 to 14 units to the acre, if it's a total multifamily, ground-oriented, that's over 60 units, 50, 60 units in here without a secondary means of egress.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't expect it to be 60 units. I don't want to comment on how many units. That could change very much depending on the size. My one comment would be is, the fire department has had an opportunity to comment on this, and they have no objections. We have a fire code and a building code put in place to deal with this, and I think that the appropriate channels have been taken to ensure that this won't be a problem moving forward.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if there is a problem, it won't be ours, I guess.
Okay, are there any other comments? Any comments from the audience? Are we ready to render a decision? If so, can I have a mover and a seconder?
I'll move.
Move to be granted.
Second?
Second.
Could you speak a bit louder, please? I put the microphone on.
Oh, Bernie, you forgot to put your microphone on.
I move to accept the application.
Second?
Conditions?
You said some conditions?
Are we going to have some conditions on this? As per the planning report? Can I have those stated, please?
File B9, 219P, 711 Quaker Road, Pelham. The above decision is subject to the following conditions. The satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer. Number 1, the Part 4 is to merge with Part 5. 2, that the Secretary Treasurer be provided with a solicitor's written undertaking to merge the said lands. B, registerable legal description of the subject parcel together with a copy of the deposited reference plan. Number 3, that the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. All costs associated and fulfilling conditions of consent shall be borne by the applicant. The decision is based on the following reasons. The application conforms to the policy of the Town of Pelham official plan, regional policy plan, and provincial policy statement, and complies with the town zoning bylaw. Number 2, this decision is rendered having regard to the provisions of sections 51(24), 51(25) of the Planning Act, RSO, as amended. The Committee of Adjustment considers all written and oral submissions and finds that subject to the conditions of provisional consent, this application meets Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Regional Official Plan, and the Town of Pelham Plan.
All right, can we have a vote on this? All in favor? Carried. Move to the next section. application in front of us is B10, 2019. Do we have anyone representing the owner? Thank you, Mr. Hykoop.
I thought they were concurrently.
Well, we didn't do them concurrently, we did them one at a time.
Okay.
So I think this one should probably go a lot quicker. I'm hopeful.
Okay.
Holly, could you please summarize the planning report?
Yes. Application for consent, file B10/2019P, 717 Quaker Road. The subject parcel shown as Part 2 on the attached sketch is an interior parcel of land situated 61.14 meters south of Quaker Road, lying west of Clare Avenue, in the town of Pelham. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and to convey 2,182.97 meters square of land to merge with the abutting property to the east for residential use. Part 1 is to be retained for continued residential use of a single detached dwelling known as 717 Quaker Road. To date, the following comments have been received. Building Department, no comments. Public Works, no comments. Bell Canada, no objections. Tax Department, that all municipal taxes owing to the town of Pelham on the subject's lands, as detailed in correspondence from the Treasurer and Tax Collector dated December 6, 2019, be paid in full to the town to the satisfaction of the Treasurer. Public comments and responses. Does not support the boundary adjustment application because lack of information regarding future developments of Part 2, 4, and 5. How many units would be created for each of the parts? Unknown. Is there only one access point? Unknown. Is the roadway legal size? Will it be accessible for emergency vehicles? There is no roadway proposed with this application. Are there building setback regulations? Yes. Planning staff are of the opinion that the proposal applies current planning and development goals regarding future intensification of land to provide for appropriate infill development, making more efficient use of the existing urban lands where suitable to do so. The severance will better position the lands for future subdivision or development in a more efficient manner, which will not negatively affect the developability of the balance of the lands. The proposed severance should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regards to traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. In the planning staff's opinion, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms with provincial, regional, and local plans. Planning staff recommend that consent file B10/2019P be granted. The following conditions are suggested: that the applicant, that all municipal taxes owing to the town of Pelham on the subject lands as detailed in the correspondence from the Treasurer and Tax Collector dated December 6, 2019 be paid in full to the town to the satisfaction of the Treasurer. Merge Parts 4 with Parts 2 and 5 concurrently. Provide the Secretary-Treasurer with a registered legal description of the subject parcel together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for the use of the issuance of the Certificate of Consent. Provide the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary-Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions of the consent shall be borne by the applicant.
Mr. Hykoop, do you want to expand upon the comments of the Secretary?
To you, Mr. Chair, no, I think all my comments made on the previous application are applicable to this application, and no further comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hykoop. Any member of the audience wish to ask any questions? Any members of the committee wish to ask any questions of Mr. Hykoop? Are we ready to render a decision? Can I have a mover and a seconder for the granting or disapproval of this particular application?
I'll second that.
Move approval of the application, Mr. Chairman.
And I will second it.
Conditions. The above decision, subject to the following conditions. Part 4 and Part 5 to merge, Secretary Treasurer be provided with solicitors' written undertaking to merge the said lands, registrable legal description of the subject parcel together with copy of deposited reference plan Final certification fee of $395 payable to the treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. All associated with fulfilling conditions of consent shall be borne by the applicant. The decision is based on the following reasoning. The application conforms to the policy of the Town of Pelham. Official plan, regional policy plan, provincial policy statement complies with the town's zoning bylaw. This decision is rendered having regard to the provisions of the sections 5124, 5125 of the Planning Act, RSO, as amended. Committee of Adjustment considered all written and oral submissions and finds that, subject to the conditions of provisional consent, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan and Niagara Regional Official Plan and the town official plan. Those conditions are in addition to some of the ones that you read. Is that not correct through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Secretary?
There's one other condition that we should add, and that is that to the satisfaction of the treasurer, that all municipal taxes owing to the town of
The one
Pelham.
that was missing from this list.
Yes.
Yes.
So we can make sure we have the first condition. Can we have a vote on the matter? All in favor? Carried. So now we're going to move on to application B12 concerning the property 686 Quaker Road. Is there any member of the public, the applicant, wish to come? Can I have your name, please?
Joe Tomeno, I'm here on behalf of the applicant and the owner, on behalf of the owner at 686 Quaker Road.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Can you
Yes.
read the report, the summary of the planning report? Thank you.
Application for consent, file B12/2019P, 686 Quaker Road. The subject parcel, shown as Part 1 on the attached sketch, has 22.56 meters of frontage on the northwest corner of Quaker Road and Clare Avenue, and known locally as 690 Quaker Road in the town of Pelham. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and to convey 907 meters square of land, Part 1, for future development, undetermined at this time. 1382 meters square of land, Part 2, is to be retained for continued commercial use, known as 686 Quaker Road. Note, the severance is intended to divide the parcel along the pre-existing lot lines which formerly separated the two parcels before they inadvertently merged untitled under the same ownership. To date, the following comments have been received. Building Department, no comments. Public Works, no comments. Bell Canada, no objections. Public comments. Objects to the neighborhood commercial zoning as they propose lot seems too small for the NC zone and that the noise activity likely to be generated from the permitted uses would be intrusive to the residential properties. The subject land has been zoned NC since at least 1987. The commercial zoning actually dates back to 1971, which predates most of the surrounding residential subdivisions, which were built over the last 3 decades. Desire to know what the future undetermined development would be. Unknown. The property is currently zoned neighborhood commercial, which permits mixed-use residential commercial buildings. The severance should be conditional upon rezoning to the single detached residential use. This is not an appropriate condition given the context and historic status of the NC zoning. The mixed-use NC zone conforms with provincial, regional, and town policies and represents wise land use planning due to its geography and location along the Collector Road. Planning staff are of the opinion that the proposal applies current planning and development goals dealing with appropriate lot creation principles such as traditional lot geometry and location without hindering future development opportunities on existing urban land. The severance will not impede the subject lands or the neighboring lands from future development opportunities in any way. The proposed severance should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhoods with regards to traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. In Planning's opinion, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to provincial, regional, and local plans. Planning staff recommend that the consent known as File B12/2019P be granted subject to the following conditions. That the applicant ensure the new lot is serviced with an individual 20 millimeter water service and 125 millimeter sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with town standards. Installation of any services will require temporary works permit to be obtained and approved by the Director of Public Works. The applicant shall bear the costs associated with these works. Submit a drawing indicating the locations of the individual water service and sanitary laterals for all lots to confirm no existing services branch from or through any proposed lot lines to other lands and from or through the remnant parcel of the other lands. Locate cards for all lots shall be required after the installation of new services. Submit a comprehensive overall lot grading and drainage plan demonstrating that the drainage neither relies upon nor negatively impacts neighboring properties, and that all drainage will be contained within the respective boundaries of the new parcel to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works. That the applicant sign the Town of Pelham's memorandum of understanding explaining the development charges and cash in lieu of the dedication of land for park purposes are required prior to the issuance of building permit. Provide the Secretary Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject parcel together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for the use in the issuance of the certificate of consent. Provide the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions of consent shall be borne by the applicant.
Mr. Tamino, do you have any words of wisdom you wish to add to for the committee's deliberations?
Just a couple comments. One, the owner always thought these were two separate lots when he purchased them. Unfortunately, excuse me, that they merged in title on the lawyer's hands. That's all that happened. And the severed parcel has always been vacant for some time. And both the retained parcel and the severed parcel meet the zoning requirements. So there's no requested or both the severed and the retained parcel meet the regulations.
So in reality, this is really a boundary adjustment to reflect previous boundaries that were established prior to what, 1980? 1971, long before even our zoning bylaw. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Are we ready to render a decision? Oh, any members of the public wish to make any comments on what's been said so far? Are we ready to render a decision? If we are, can I have a mover and a seconder?
I move.
To grant? Or not? Okay.
Second, Mr. Chair.
File B12, 2019P, 686 Quaker Road, Pelham. The above decision is subject to the following conditions. To the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works, that the new lot is serviced with an individual 20-meter water service and 120-meter sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with town standards. Installation of any service will require a temporary works permit to be obtained and approved by the Public Works Department. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Number 2, submit a drawing to the satisfaction of the Public Works indicating the locations of the individual water service and sanitary laterals for the forms to confirm no existing service branches from or through any proposed lot lines to other lands, and from or through the remnant parcel to other lands. Locate cards for all lots shall be required after the installation of new services. Number 3, submit a comprehensive overall lot grading and drainage plan demonstrating that the drainage neither relies upon or negatively impacts neighborhood properties, and that all drainage will be contained within the respective boundaries of the new parcel to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works. To the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development, number 1, sign the Town of Pelham Standard Memorandum of Understanding, explaining that development charges in cash in lieu of the dedication of land for park purposes are required prior to the insurance of a building permit. To the satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer, number 1, that the Secretary Treasurer be provided with a registrable legal description of the subject parcel together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for use in the issuance of the certificate of consent. Number 2, that the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions of consent shall be borne by the applicant. This decision is based on the following reason. Number 1, the application confirms to the policies of the Town of Pelham official plan, regional policy plan, and provincial policy statement, and compliance with the town's zoning bylaw. Number 2, this decision is rendered having regard to the provisions of sections 51.21.4 and 51.25 of the Planning Act, RSO as amended. Number 3, the Committee of Adjustment considered all written and oral submissions and finds that subject to the conditions of proposal consent, this application meets Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Regional Official Plan, and the town official plan.
And with that, Mr. Tamino, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, did we have, I think we did vote, didn't we? I thought we did vote.
I didn't put my hand up.
Are we all in favor? Are we in, Bill was going to second it, I remember that
Yes, I
happening.
remember that, but I just need.
Are we all in favor? Granted.
Thank you.
We'll do it twice. Okay. We will take maybe a 5-minute break. We've been here for half an hour or so. It'll give me a chance to get all my papers in order. I think we're going to have the, like I say, a 5-minute break while I go to the washroom also. Any members of the committee have anything? Can we have this short break? Thank you.
You can call recess.
That's it. I had it up. I didn't.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now that we have a full committee again, I would like... Can we have a little decorum, please, so we can get started? We're now going to do application B11, 2019, which is the severance application for the property in question, 20 Allen Crescent. Holly, can you please summarize the planning report for us? Thank you.
Yes. Through you, Mr. Chair, I would just like to reiterate that all comments that have been received by the public have been forwarded in full to the committee members prior to the meeting. Same comments will be in this PowerPoint presentation. They are summarized, but I just want the public to know that all comments in full have been provided to the Committee of Adjustment members.
And just to let you know, there it is, I can prove it. And yes, we as committee members, I'm sure have read, I know I've read at least 2 or 3 times. So with that, Holly, would you please proceed?
Yes. Application for consent, file B11/2019P, 20 Allen Crescent. The subject parcel shown as Part 1 on the attached sketch has 14.20 meters of frontage on Elizabeth Street, lying west of Allen Crescent in the town of Pelham. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and to convey 432.82 meters square of land for the construction of a residential dwelling. 835.94 meters squared land is to be retained for continued use of the single detached dwelling known as 20 Allen Crescent. Note, A28/2020P and A29/2020P are being considered concurrently. To date, the following comments have been received. Building Department, no comments. Public Works, no objections, see conditions. Bell Canada, no objections. Public comments, summarized and response. The 60-meter, 200 feet circulation of hearing notice is inadequate, and Council should hear the applications, not the Committee of Adjustment. The Planning Act of Ontario provides planning authorities, municipal council, with the legislative authority to appoint a committee of adjustment to hear certain types of Planning Act applications, i.e. consent and minor variance. These applications are deemed for a low priority status by municipal council province versus the official plan amendments, zoning bylaw amendments, and subdivisions.
Please be quiet while this is going on. I don't want to hear any discussion from the gallery. Thank you.
Public notice circulation requirements for Committee of Adjustment applications are prescribed under the Planning Act. Allowing a new house on a smaller lot contradicts the original planning and character of the neighborhood. The existing neighborhood was designed in an era where land resources were considered abundant and regard for over-resource scarcity was of little importance. This is no longer the case. How can the original character, charm, and feel of the neighborhood be upheld? The applicant has expressed the desire to build a bungalow for this reason exactly, which is likely the reason for the requested increase of lot coverage. However, since the zoning bylaw permits a 10.5 meter height as of right across all low-density residential zones, there are no guarantee that a 2-story dwelling could not be built on the property in this neighborhood. The applicant has requested a reduction in the front yard setback for Part 1. This is meant to maintain the consistent building streetscape, as the current exterior side yard setback required by the R1 zone is 5 meters. The adjacent dwelling to the west appears to have less than 5 meter setback from Elizabeth Drive based on GIS parcel mapping. One single detached residential lot in an existing single detached residential neighborhood does help maintain the character, charm, and feel of the neighborhood, pending appropriate urban design elements. The severance will devastate the existing residents and confuse potential buyers, confused by the lack of homogeneity. There is little evidence to support such a claim. Homogeneous neighborhoods actually have an extensive record of social dysfunction, particularly with respect to social economic exclusion, unstable shifts in demographics, which negatively affect public school enrollments, along with other institutions and commercial businesses. Reinvestment in existing neighborhoods is generally considered a positive, as it signals desirability. One new single detached dwelling in an existing low-density residential neighborhood will not cause confusion. There are already parking problems on Allen Crescent. Parking issues appear to be a remote prospect in this neighborhood, perhaps with the exception of the annual Summerfest weekend each summer. Most, if not all, of the existing houses in the vicinity have in excess of 2 to 4 parking stalls per lot. On-street parking is also permitted and visibly abundant. This development will set a precedent. Every Planning Act development application is considered independently on its own merits. How will storm drainage affect the neighbors? A grading and drainage plan is required as a condition of severance approval. At building permit, there is also a grading plan required for approval. The proposed lot would eliminate the garden yard of 20 Allen Crescent, which contradicts the Town Beautification Committee's statement on enhancing visual appeal and with respect to the environmental stewardship. The remnant parcel, Part 2, would continue to be served by a sizable L-shaped rear yard amenity area in addition to a very large front yard. Accommodating residential housing growth within the existing urban areas, intensification is one of the most ecological sound choices a municipality could undertake, as it helps to avoid premature urban settlement expansion to accommodate the same levels of growth, intensification, and redevelopment, also utilize existing linear infrastructure and service and public service facilities. Environmental degradation associated with tree removal, new hard surfaces, and waste created from pool/shed removal. Environmental impacts are important and must be considered at a high level. Prohibiting infill development because of micro impacts associated with small lot development is a zero-sum scenario. If the market demands warrants new house construction, then a house might instead be located at the near edge of the town's urban settlement area limits. The degree of environmental impacts associated with an extra-urban alternative can be argued as much more harmful. For example, new development on the periphery often requires the extension of brand new linear infrastructure to support the new development. Many more trees might be removed instead, and sometimes of a greater ecological value. And this type of development usually interferes more with the ecological function of key natural heritage features more than an intensification growth scenario. Intensification development not only better utilizes existing infrastructure, but they often situate closer to shopping areas, schools, public service facilities, which translates into a reduced transportation impact and thus an environmental one. The proposal abuses the R1 zone requirements, which were meant to protect the existing neighborhood. Ironically, based on current lot sizes of Elizabeth Street and Allen Crescent, the default R1 zoning requirements would have yielded narrower frontages, smaller lots, and more density. Allowing intensification in an established R1 zone neighborhood reduces the potential for a healthy mix of housing options in Fawn Hill. The neighborhood is actually characterized by R1, R2, RM1, and RM2, residential zoning as per Schedule A5 of the zoning bylaw. There is no evidence to support this claim. Loss of views. Ontario planning tribunals have consistently deemed there to be no legal right to a view over the private properties of others, unless only in special circumstances the proposed obstruction to such long-established amenities is of such a magnitude as of the cause to cause an unacceptable adverse impact upon the visual environment of the greater public. This proposal is not considered at risk of such level of harm to the neighborhood or to conflict with the intent in this respect of the official plan and zoning bylaw. Furthermore, no increase in building height was requested. Loss of privacy. Figure 1. View of the subject lands from 11 Highland Avenue submitted by a neighbor with superimposition. The degree of the neighborhood discomfort associated with the proposed development's potential for intrusive look into others' private amenity areas is always difficult to measure, qualify, and subjective by nature. Distasteful window alignments and openings in close proximity to one another, rear yard amenities, is discouraged. Minor variance file A28/2019P seeks a reduction of the side yard building setback from 1.8 meters to 1.2 meters As per the Ontario Building Code, the closer a structure gets to a property line, the greater the restriction is in effect with the percentage of window openings permitted on the wall. It would seem that the developer would effectively and voluntarily be limiting the number of size of permitted windows on the future west wall of the proposed house in lieu of 60 centimeters encroachment.
Please wait till we actually ask for comments from the audience.
Train of thought on this particular point here.
Well, keep your thought. Thank you.
Elizabeth Street has high traffic volumes. Was it not the town's plan to omit sidewalks due to the large lawns, open space, and long driveways? Elizabeth Street is designated as a local road with low traffic volumes. Planning staff do not know the town's former rationale to omit installing sidewalks in several subdivisions over the last 60-plus years. However, most often, a lack of sidewalk has to do with the street design itself or even their costs. Specifically, narrow pavements with low traffic volume and slow vehicle speeds historically wouldn't warrant the inclusion of sidewalks. Through this practice has become frequently abandoned in modern development. Properties should not change after development has taken place some 70 years ago. Human settlement continued to evolve throughout the course of history. There has always been some degree of change to communities over time. Assumes that the new house will be rented, and renters tend to not maintain properties as well as owners. Objection on the base of tenure is a human rights matter which cannot be considered. The back of the house cannot be deemed the side of the house to avoid the rules. The realignment of the technical yards originates from Section 5 of the zoning bylaws definitions, not the developer's strategy. The narrowest frontage is considered the front yard by definition. The rear yard of the house should not flank the side yard of another house. This lot arrangement is widespread and can even be observed several times in this neighborhood. The proposal will destroy our rear yard privacy from its overlook. Any windows on the back or side of this house will allow residents to look over our fence. The applicant has requested a reduction in the side yard setback from 1.8 meters to 1.2 meters, file A28/2019P. In accordance with the Ontario Building Code, buildings closely situated to the property line have very restricted permissible openings, represented as a percentage of the wall face. By reducing the side yard setback, the new dwelling would actually be voluntarily limiting its potential for privacy overlook. The proposal will have a detrimental effect on the property's value. There is no evidence to support this. Redevelopment and reinvestment in neighborhoods is generally associated with a positive impact on lands. The size of the proposed lot, Part 1, is not consistent with the surrounding properties. The proposed lot is marginally smaller than its immediate surroundings along Elizabeth Drive and Allen Crescent, notwithstanding the townhouse development east of Elizabeth Street and the smaller lots west of Highland Avenue. The new lot, Part 1, will have no yard or open space. The default rear yard setback of 7.5 meters is being maintained. The consent sketch provides illustration of a building envelope based on the requested zoning setbacks. This does not necessarily represent the proposed footprint of the future dwelling. It should also be noted that in keeping with the character of the neighborhood, one-story bungalows, the proposed lot coverage of a bungalow is expected to be larger than that of a similar size two-story dwelling to accommodate the same floor area, thereby directly impacting the size of the open space. People should not be allowed to apply for variances to the zoning bylaws. The Ontario Planning Act provides the statutory authority for variances to municipal zoning bylaws to be heard. The developer has no intention of residing on either the retained or severed lot. Not relevant. The new lot is not physically compatible with, nor maintains the character, stability of the neighborhood. The appearance, layout, building footprint, and overall proportion of the building to open space combined with tree removals will also impact the neighborhood. The proposed lot geometry is rather traditional in shape for typical residential lots with a 14-meter frontage and a 30-plus meter depth. One large tree would need to be removed. A second, closer to the street, may be able to be preserved depending on the driveway location and construction feasibility. New street trees are suggested conditions of severance approval. A lot for one single detached dwelling in a mainly single detached residential neighborhood is a compatible land use as most ground-oriented forms of housing. The tree removal associated with the proposed lot may damage the roots of other mature trees on the Highland Avenue properties, leading to their decline. With no green screen, the intrusion of the new house will be worrisome. There appears to be one tree situated to the westerly lot line of the subject lands. It is unclear what property it is located on based on the survey sketch. The potential for root damage upon basement excavation is legitimate and should be avoided if at all possible. Small lots produce no large trees and no biodiversity. The proposed rear yard is still capable of supporting large capillary trees. Proper urban street trees can also grow quite large despite being constrained by gravel and concrete. A variety of native trees are not the only type of biodiversity, as other types of native vegetation, shrubs, flowers, etc., can also support various types of wildlife in urban environments. It should be noted that urban infill intensification is one of the best ways humans can ensure preservation of natural environments by avoiding unnecessary outward urban expansion, which often threatens pristine natural heritage systems. Provincial policies are general guidelines. Section 3 of the Planning Act requires that the decisions affecting planning matters shall be consistent with policy statements issued under the Act. Provincial policy statement policies are outcome-oriented, and some policies provide flexibility provided that the provincial interests are upheld. Provincial policy statements policies represent minimum standards. All decisions made after May 16, 2019 are affect a planning matter will conform with this growth plan, subject to any legislative or regulatory provisions providing otherwise. The policies of this plan take precedence over the provincial policy statement to the extent of any conflict. The Planning Justification Report is biased. The report was authored by a registered professional planner in the province of Ontario. Section 2.1 of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute Professional Code of Practice states that members shall impart independent professional opinions to clients, employers, the public, and tribunals. It's inappropriate for Planning Justification Report to draw comparisons to the R2 zoned properties in close proximity. The Planning Justification Report discusses existing development in neighborhoods which is relevant. The Planning Justification Report fails to mention the distance between the proposed building envelope to the adjacent dwelling located at 11 Highland Avenue, which is 18.5 meters. The Planning Justification Report comments on the setbacks between severed and remnant lot, which is appropriate and consistent with standards of the practice. There is no issue with the setback between dwellings. Planning staff are of the opinion that the proposal applies current planning and development goals dealing with appropriate infill development, making more efficient use of the existing urban lands where suitable to do so. The proposed severance should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regards to traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. The remnant land will continue as a single detached residential use for the foreseeable future. In planning staff opinion, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the provincial, regional, and local plans. Planning staff recommend that the consent notice file B11/2019P be granted subject to the following conditions. That the applicant obtain concurrent approval of minor variance files A28/2019 for minimum lot area and minimum lot frontage, A29/2019P inclusive, conduct an archaeological assessment and receive clearance from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport, ensure that all new lots are serviced with an individual 20mm water service and 125mm sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with town standards. Installation of any service will require a temporary works permit to be obtained and approved by the Public Works Department. If existing services are proposed for reconnection, such services shall be inspected by Public Works Department to determine their condition is satisfactory prior to connection. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Submit a drawing indicating the location of the individual water services and sanitary laterals for all lots to confirm no existing services branches from or through any proposed lot lines to other lands and from or through the remnant parcel to other lands. Locate cards for all lots shall be required after the installation of new services. Submit a comprehensive overall lot grading and drainage plan for all parcels demonstrating that the drainage neither relies upon nor negatively impacts neighboring properties to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works. Obtain approval for driveway entrance and culvert permits for the new lot issued through Public Works Department to the town's satisfaction. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Reinstate part of the westerly curb on the existing driveway apron of Part 2 to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works. Plant 2 large capillary trees from the town's approved tree standard planting schedule along with Part 1 frontage, one on each side of the new driveway and to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Obtain and close a demolition permit for the removal of the attached canopy and shed to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Sign the Town of Pelham's Standard Memorandum of Understanding explaining the development charges and cash in lieu of the dedication of land for park purposes and require prior to the issuance of building permit. Provide to the Secretary-Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject parcel together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for the issuance of the certificate of consent. Provide the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary-Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions shall be borne by the applicant.
Thank you, Holly. And in my introductions, I forgot to mention that we have two people on my immediate right side. Ms. Barb Williams, Director of Planning and Development, and Mr. Curtis Thompson, a planner with our planning department. And with that, Craig, Mr. Rowe, do you have any comments you wish to add to the what has been read into the proceedings of the meeting?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just prepared a bit of a brief presentation, just a little bit more casual overview of what the application entails. So good evening, committee members. My name is Craig Rowe. I'm a senior player with Upper Canada Consultants in St. Catharines and the agent for Mancini Developments. I'm also a registered professional planner in the province of Ontario. Although staff has already provided a formal overview of the file, I would like to provide an additional plain language overview of the applications to the benefit of the committee and those in attendance, as my hope to provide some additional understanding about the proposed applications. So geographically, the property is located east of Highland Avenue on the northeast corner of Elizabeth Drive and Allen Crescent, Fawn Hill. The property currently contains a single detached dwelling with an attached garage, a lean-to structure, and a swimming pool. So this is a zoom in, it's just showing generally where the proposed consent line is. Thank you. The proposed lot will be 432.82 square meters and located on the west side of the existing dwelling and have frontage of 14.2 meters along Elizabeth Drive. The subject lands are within a reasonable walking distance of the downtown and are considered to be an appropriate location for context-sensitive infilling. The property contains 2 mature trees. One tree will likely need to be removed to facilitate the development, while the other may be able to be preserved. The existing woodboard fence along Elizabeth Drive will also be removed. So on the screen, I've provided a diagram here with some red circles, which indicates actually the physical location of those variances. So the first one I'll begin with is the lot frontage of the proposed lot. So 1420. So in an effort to preserve the existing dwelling, the proposed lot will occupy the area that's currently serving as the backyard of the dwelling at 20 Allen Crescent. A frontage of 14.2 meters is requested, whereas a frontage of 19 meters is required. This translates to 4.8 meters or 15.7 foot reduction in the required frontage. The reduced frontage still provides sufficient room for a house of comparable size to adjacent properties to be constructed. Lot area. As a result of the reduced frontage, the lot sizing is also being reduced, being proposed at 432.82 square meters instead of the required 700 square meters, representing a reduction of 267.18 square meters. As demonstrated on the provided survey sketch, the proposed building footprint can accommodate a dwelling similar in floor area to those in the neighborhood. The minimum requirement for a building footprint with a one-story dwelling is 115.5 square meters in the town's official plan. Approximately 194 square meters or 2,096 square feet of buildable space can be provided for the development, which is consistent with this requirement. It is my opinion that the requested variances will facilitate a dwelling that is comparable in size to those in the neighborhood. It should be noted that these two variants, lot area and then the lot frontage for the proposed lot, are the only two which are required for the parcel to be severed. The rest are preferential to facilitate preferred building design. So I'll walk you through those right now. So interior side yard setback. The zoning bylaw requires a minimum side yard setback in R1 zones of 1.8 meters. Our client is seeking a 1.2 meter setback for both the proposed and retained parcels, being a reduction of 0.6 meters or approximately 2 feet. In other municipalities such as Welland, Port Colborne, and St. Catharines, interior side yard setbacks are 1.2 meters or less. A reduction of 2 feet on either side of the proposed building envelope is considered minor. Further, by seeking a reduced setback, the provisions of the building code come into effect and have a limiting factor on the amount of glazing windows that can be allowed. This can limit the potential for overlook. Next is front yard setback. A 5-meter setback to the proposed building envelope from Elizabeth Drive has been proposed. The zoning requirement is 7.7 meters. The intent of this requested reduction is to ensure the facade of a proposed dwelling is in alignment with the face of the dwelling at 20 Allen Crescent and the side of the dwelling at 9 Highland Avenue. So we're looking for generally like that. Ensuring a consistent plane of development will contribute to a better framing of the street and allow the dwelling to integrate well within its surroundings. Town staff has recommended that an additional variance provision be added that will require the garage to be stepped back to a minimum of 6 meters. The owner has no objection to this, as it will ensure a proper sized parking space is provided on the property. The existing fence along Elizabeth Drive is currently situated on the property line. The removal of that structure, combined with the 5-meter setback, would be appropriate on this street. Additionally, I should point out there is approximately 7 meters from the property line to the back of the curb on Elizabeth Drive. So cumulatively, this dwelling would be 12 plus meters from the existing traveled roadway. Next is rear yard setback. Down here. So if the severance is approved, this will cause the rear yard of 20 Allen Crescent to move based on definition. So currently, it's here. If it gets cut, by definition, it moves here. Currently, the rear yard is between the functional rear of the dwelling and 9 and 11 Highland Avenue. After severance, the rear yard by definition becomes a yard adjacent to 18 Allen Crescent. The reduction is requested to reflect this technical shift and recognize the existing position of the dwelling. The rear yard for the proposed lot meets the requirement of the zoning bylaw. Relief is requested for the existing dwelling to recognize the existing location of the building. Next is the front yard setback of 20 Allen Crescent. There. Similarly to the rear yard and the front yard setback relief for 20 Allen Crescent to reflect the northern facade of the existing dwelling in its current position. So basically, because of the flip with the zoning, again, we're reflecting the existing condition in the new deemed front yard. So in conclusion, we've reviewed the staff comments prepared by town staff, and we're in agreement with their content and their recommendations. We have no objections either to the proposed conditions of approval. So at this time, I'm available to answer any questions the committee may have now or after the public has had their opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Rowe. Members of the public, do you have any questions on this application? I would ask that you come forward and which reminds me, I need to turn on my microphone. Anyway, please come forward and address your comments through the microphone. Please state your name and your address for the record. And
My name is Foster.
would you please come to the podium, sir?
It's on and ready.
Thanks. My name is Foster Zanuto. I live at 18 Allen Crescent, adjacent to the property in question. My first question is kind of a procedural thing. According to the agenda, you received 15 to 20 submissions, comments from us in the neighborhood. And is it the understanding that those submissions were then submitted to the planning department for their comments?
Yes,
And what
all
we're hearing today is the planning department's support of the project after reading our comments. Is that what's happened?
I would ask Mr. Thompson, who is the author of the report, to respond to that, Mr. Sanudo.
Through the chair, on all of these development applications, when we receive, it's on.
Okay.
When we receive public correspondence on development applications, as part of the municipal planner's job, we take in all the comments together with the comments we receive from agencies and various town staff. We weigh that up against planning policy, planning principles and practice. We form an opinion, and then we offer that opinion to the decision maker. In this case, the decision maker is the Committee of Adjustment. So public comments do inform planning opinion.
So the comments that we presented to the town were presented to the planning department. The planning department then indicated that it would support the proposal and is submitting those comments to the Committee of Adjustment with a recommendation that this be approved. Is that what I'm understanding?
Through the chair, I think generally, yeah, that's correct, yeah.
So the planning department is making recommendations after reading the public comments, supporting the applicant. But other than this evening, there's no formal way that we who oppose the argument can go back on the planning department for that. In other words, the planning department is recommending this to the committee after they have seen our comments and kind of reviewed our comments. That's my understanding? Is that right?
Firstly, I'll have Mr. Thompson respond to you. Ask your question through me, then I will move the question to the proper person. All the comments received from the public, whether they be in written form, came by email, they would be transferred by the secretary of the committee to the planning department for review. What we have just gone through, and a lot of the comments, there were 30 some odd submissions, or whatever's in the presentation, that dealt with the comments that came from the public. Mr. Thompson would have taken all the comments received. He checked a lot. I've read all the comments. Many of the comments were somewhat similar from different people, and others were very good comments, which I will probably try and speak to sometime later. But all those comments have been sent and filtered through the planning department. And Mr. Thompson, you want to expand upon your review further, please?
Through the chair, that was well said. Like, this is standard practice. It's not abnormal. Like, municipal planners commonly will consolidate public comments into themes and respond to them for the decision makers' consideration.
Mr. Chairman, just so I guess what I'm hearing is that the planning department has selected certain areas to comment on and rejected other areas that and not commented on those areas. Is that possible?
What actually happens is Mr. Thompson looks at all the comments. There are certain things that we as the committee are responsible to look at, and some of those are under the Planning Act. I remember there was a comment about renters. That is well beyond what we do. We have to look at the official plan. We look at the Planning Act. The Planning Act actually has several things that we are charged as a committee that we have to look at. And it comes out of, it's Section 51 of the Planning Act, subsection 24. And there are a number of things in that particular section that we have to deal with. And I'll try and go through them quickly just so you have an idea. The Act actually says, in considering a draft plan of subdivision, and as far as the Planning Act is concerned, this is the equivalent of a draft plan. It's a separation of property which requires a deed to be prepared. That's my understanding of what the definition is in the Planning Act. So have due regard for the following: the effect of the development of the proposed subdivision on matters of provincial interest. Okay, so there are certain elements of the Planning Act. The Green Belt is one of them, the Niagara Escarpment Act, if you were involved in that, okay? Whether the proposed subdivision is premature or in the public interest. I have, from my point of view, being an engineer, knowing that the sanitary sewers and water mains are constructed on Elizabeth and Allen, as far as I'm concerned, it's not premature from a servicing point of view. I don't really understand what public interest, and that was going to be one of my questions to Curtis later on, is what is the public interest part we're supposed to be? Whether the plan conforms to the official plan and adjacent plans of subdivision. Well, that's beyond I rely on Mr. Thompson to give me, does it comply with our official plan? The suitability of land for purposes which it be subdivided. Well, we know that the zoning bylaw says the general area is R1, which is single-family residential. The owner is proposing a single-family residential dwelling to be built on the severed parcel. I don't necessarily agree, but that's another problem. The number, width, location, proposed grades, and elevation of highways, adequacy of them. Yes, Elizabeth Street, it's a public highway. Curb one side, yeah, okay. Works. Dimensions and shapes of the proposed lots. Yes, the lot is basically the shape of other lots in the neighborhood. They're nice rectangular type lots. We're supposed to look at the restrictions or proposed restrictions, if any, on the land proposed to be subdivided, or the buildings and structures proposed to be erected on it, or any restrictions, if any, on the adjoining land. This is one section that was not addressed in the planner's comments, which I feel something should be addressed, because there are regulations that are being put forth that restrict the development of the land through the setbacks. They're asking for variances, and we have to look at those, and we have to give due regard to the contents of those and see if they actually impact on the neighbors and other things. Are they excessive? Are they, so there are regulations in the zoning bylaw that are going to impact on both the severed parcel and the remnant parcel. Conservation of natural resources and flood control. Well, this is a hard one because they're not adjacent to the 12-mile creek or any of the municipal drains, and that's really what they mean by the flood control. Adequacy of municipal services. Yes, I've already expressed that from my point of view as a civil engineer. Water and sewer is available. They weren't available when the subdivision was put in the early mid-1950s, and that's why we're seeing the larger size lots in that general neighborhood. They were required to deal with the effluent from the septic tanks. They're all approximately a half an acre from what I can figure. Right now, Dan, according to the regional policy plan, and severance in the rural area has to be at 1 acre. And it has to be in such a position that they can deal with the effluent from the septic bed if required, and also supply a local water supply. The next is the adequacy of school sites. Well, we got Glen A. Green, which isn't too far away, and we have A.K. Wig, which is not too far away. And I think, Curtis, you actually said in your report somewhere that E.L. Crosby is less than 2 kilometers, or an 8-minute bicycle ride. I'd be happy to do it in 8 minutes if I could, but I'd probably be closer to 15. But that's just me. The area of land, if any, within the proposed subdivision that exclusive of highways, that is not part of this particular thing. The extent which a plan design optimizes available supply means of supplying efficient use and conservation of energy. I don't think that really applies to us, but I could be wrong on that. The last was M, the interrelationship between the design of the proposed plan of subdivision and site plan control matters relating to any development on the land. We're actually a little outside because we're dealing with one lot, and normally site plan control is not, I don't believe is required. Barb, can you make comment on that for me, please?
Mr. Chair, through you, site plan control is not required for single detached dwellings.
Okay, so those are the things that we have to look at as the committee under the Planning Act. There are also things that are in our official plan that we're supposed to look at, and there are a number of sections that we're supposed to look at, and somewhere here I have a piece of paper that gives me, and I kind of have an idea what those are. So now, this is kind of your civics lesson that goes along with the Committee of Adjustment. One one of the problems I have, and I think you've brought this up before, is the intensification. Our official plan on page 14 has item A54, intensification target. Regional, I'll read a little paragraph from this particular section. Regional planning policy has allocated a future intensification target for the town of Pelham of about 300 units. This target is to be accommodated between 2015 and 2031. Background studies prepared for this official plan have confirmed that the town can meet or exceed this target. To this end, the plan has identified potential intensification areas and has articulated policies that provide guidance and direction with respect to intensification. Where appropriate, this is another paragraph, where appropriate intensification areas, including brownfields, will be planned to provide a mix of land uses that complement and support the overall residential intensification objective. These may include employment, commercial, recreation, institutional, and intercompatible land uses. There are a number of factors, and they've actually identified a couple of areas where intensification is being proposed. One is along the Highway 20 corridor, and one is also along, I believe it's the Canberra Road corridor. Am I correct, Barb, on that one?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you're correct.
They also mentioned there's some phasing we should be looking at. We should be looking at greenfield development prior to looking at where development has already occurred. And this is one of the things that bothers me more than anything with this particular application, is that we're subdividing, we're proposing to subdivide or create a severance in a well-established neighborhood that was built upon in the 50s and early 60s. And my own perspective on this is we should be looking at areas that are currently within the urban boundaries that are not currently developed. As we've seen earlier tonight, we've had 2 applications off Quaker Road where a gentleman is trying to assemble land. To me, that's where we should be looking to intensify our land uses primarily. So that is my own problem, because I've lived here in the town for 40 some odd years, like the majority of you, okay? We also have some other things. It says urban area designations. Page 17 of our official plan, policy B113, and this is also in accordance with the provincial policy statement. In accordance, and I'll read a paragraph here, just like I say, this is your civics lessons for the day. In accordance with the provincial and regional policy, the town will accommodate at least 15% of projected housing growth, or about 300 residential units within the existing built boundaries of Font Hill and Fenwick, as illustrated on land use schedules to this plan. I just happen to have brought my official, I don't have the official plan because that's on my computer and you'd never be able to see it. But there are nice maps and it shows really where the urban areas are and what we're anticipating to foresee in our official plan and where development can occur. For the purpose of this plan, residential intensification is defined as development or redevelopment of existing vacant and underutilized land within the existing urban areas of Font Hill and Fenwick into building types that more efficiently use existing urban space and services. In reviewing intensification proposals, the town will assess the density of such proposals relative to the surrounding neighborhood as well as the site and building design of the proposal. The town will also assess how issues such as landscaping, access, parking, utilities, and maintenance have been addressed in the proposal. From my point of view, and this is strictly me speaking, and I'll ask my fellow members probably to comment on my comments also. I'm looking at this and saying, we really need to look at what the surrounding neighborhood currently has. And is the development that's being proposed by this gentleman consistent with that? It is and it isn't. And this is my conundrum. Should we be looking at areas where we could, say, subdivide an existing urban lot? There are areas in the town of Pelham that may be doable. Personally, I don't think this is one of them. Okay? And I look at that from the point of view of the variances being proposed also. So this is my conundrum. Is intensification required? Yes, it should be. We should look at it very carefully. Okay? And we should look at the context of this intensification within the neighborhood that is already there. And this also has an impact, particularly in Font Hill, and to somewhat extent in Fenwick, is that we have large lots that were developed in the 50s and 60s when before we had sanitary sewers. They did not come into the town of Pelham and the village of Font Hill till 1974. That's when they actually became operable, okay? We had larger lots. In my area of Font Hill, you could not get a lot during the 50s and 60s because we're in clay and effluent doesn't escape from a septic bed. Up on the hill, you're on the sandy cane. You dig a hole, you fill it full of water, and 20 minutes later it's gone. But this also had an impact. And later on, it became an impact that drove the installation of sewers. Because the effluent from the septic beds on the top of the cane eventually percolated down to that clay layer that we call the Haldeman clay layer, clay land. And it goes along, the water flows along that layer, that boundary layer, and eventually contaminated the town of Font Hill Wells. When I moved to Font Hill in the 70s and I had my children, we had the water tested, of course, because of the health unit. And we had a high nitrite, not nitrate, nitrite level, which at the time was considered detrimental for the use in formula because it would have an impact on development, child's development. That's another story. But this is what happened, and this is really one of the reasons that drove the installation of sewers, which now gives us the opportunity to do some intensification. Am I correct on so far what I've spoke? Barb.
Yes, Mr. Chair, you're certainly correct. Thank you.
So this is the end of my civics lesson. And these are the conundrums that we as a committee have to deal with. And now I'm open to hear anybody else offer any comments on this application. Yes, sir, would you please come forward?
First of all, when it comes to the
Please state your name and your address.
Robert Jensen, 11 Highland Avenue, right behind that property there.
Mr. Chairman, just before this gentleman speaks, could I ask the staff to put this up
Yes, please.
so that I can see where?
Can I comment on that before we put that up, though?
Yeah.
I want to comment on that.
Okay, I
I'll
just
look at
want to
that.
know where these people live relative to the application,
Yeah. I live right.
or maybe we can flip back and forth.
Well, we can, but I live right here. On that property. So my name is Robert Jensen. I reside at 11 Highland Avenue. Been a Pelham resident for 20 plus years. And I'm right behind this property here. So first, as far as the comments from the public that were responded to by the planning committee, they seem like they cherry-picked a lot of comments. They seem like they missed a lot of things, and they cherry-picked things that they could argue against, and they skipped a lot of things that have merit, and I think a lot of their answers are lacking. This justification report, it'll help me. I could use it to start my fire, but I mean, there's not much else in there that's, sorry.
Mr. Chair?
No, let's keep your comments. Look,
Okay,
can you,
all right.
can you speak? We've had a lot of comments, and I believe it or not, your submission in total covers pages of our agenda from 77 to 89.
Okay.
And what has been done is Mr. Thompson has reviewed all the comments. He's looked at the things that are pertinent to our deliberations.
Okay.
And once again, I can look at yours. You had natural heritage, cultural heritage architecture. That's Mr. Zananudo. And then I can get to yours. And you dealt basically with the owner wherever, okay? Affects your opposition, that's great. The size of the proposal is not consistent with surrounding properties. And I have a tendency to agree with you.
Yes.
But Once again, back to my civics lesson. Prior to 1974, you needed the big size lot to deal with the septic, and same as your property. Now that the sewers, we may not need that because they're sanitary sewer. As I said to you in my opening remarks, personally, it's a little wonky, okay? And I realize that your rear impact, you believe it's going to be affected. I have no difficulty. Curtis, do you want to add, because for something I've missed?
The only thing I'd like to say is just because, sorry, through the chair, just because the public comments weren't included verbatim directly in the plan justification report does not mean that they're part of the Committee of Adjustments consideration. Every public comment that we had received has been included on the Committee of Adjustments agenda.
Okay. All right, so one thing that was not mentioned was allowing this small lot, which is totally inconsistent with the bylaws for a 700 meter square lot. According to the bylaws, that lot is not severable. It's not big enough to cut into two 700 square meter lots. But by letting this small lot be severed off the backyard, it reorientates the lot. I hear a lot of talk about this 1.8 meters, 1.2 meters. Right now, the setback is 7.5 meters. The houses on Highland Avenue were there before the rest of those houses. And when those houses were built, they were orientated backyard to backyard. I suspect as part of a plan to respect the existing houses that were there. So allowing this small lot now goes from 7.5 meters from my fence to 1.2 meters to my fence, to my backyard. I can't change my property now. My property's been established. Now all of a sudden somebody can build up to that close to the property line because this is going to allow a lot that's not even consistent with bylaws. So the effect on our property is tremendous. Because the lot is being reorientated because of the allowance of a 430 square meter lot, which is much smaller than the surrounding lots. Most of the lots in that neighborhood are 1,200 square meters, and nobody sits on two lots. Everybody's lots are just big enough, but not big enough to split into two. Like this lot is what, 1,200 and 1,300 square meters? Close to 1,300? It's not big enough to split into two lots if the bylaw says 700. So the reorientation of the lot is just not fair to the surrounding neighbors at all. Having a construction of a house instead of 7.5 meters, now 1.5 meters off my back property. Any deck on the back of that house or any windows on the back of that house or side of that house, they're not going to be looking out at their own yard. They're going to be looking right into our yards. It's a huge encroachment. And as far as density is concerned, you're putting one house in between three existing houses. That increases our density a lot. Maybe not on the overall neighborhood, but it's just really not.
So I'm getting to the point. Do you have a question that I can direct to staff? Staff, do you want, I realize if you look at the entire parcel, the existing parcel at 20, it's around 1,200 square meters. We have seen other severances. We've seen other developments come forth very similar to this kind of a corner lot, where this committee has granted consents, but the lots being created were a lot closer to the 700 square meter mark than this particular one. This is a question that we were going to address as part of the variance application, not necessarily part of the severance application or the conveyance. What we are considering, is this a good conveyance? That's I think where we're at the current time. Mr. Thompson, am I correct in going that way? Or are we supposed to be looking at the variances as part of the severance?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The severances come first. The Committee of Adjustment also has the ability to basically pick and choose which variances get approved. It's not an all or nothing, so like they could approve just the frontage and area but nothing else, for example, or they can modify the provisions.
Turn on your mic, please.
It's on. Sorry, it's on.
the severance
Well,
allows.
basically, what we're doing, and as Mr. Thompson said, we're looking at the severance.
Right.
In our opinion, basically, I've gone through kind of the test that we as a committee are supposed to look at, both from the point of view of the Planning Act and our own official plan. And I'm going to, after we finish dealing with the public discussion, I'm going to let Mr. Rowe have some comments, and then we're going to ask other members of the committee, and then at that point in time, you may find out where we, the committee members, stand on this particular thing, on this particular application. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, I understand how the process works, but I just feel that I wanted to get some things out there that aren't being mentioned.
Because I've just managed to look at, I'm back here to looking at your submission, and thank you very much for doing it. You've spent a lot of time. Yes, you have looked at the official plan. You've looked at sections of the zoning bylaw, and I thank you very much for spending the time and putting your submission forward. Thank you for the pictures, because you actually gave me pictures so I didn't have to walk in your backyard, which was great. Curtis used your pictures to kind of show you what may happen and what happens under the building code, as was explained in the report he did read, was that because of the narrow side yard that's going, if we agree to the variances, will reduce the amount of glass that gentleman's going to be able to have in the house on the west side of the property. And that's also going to affect, because he's asking for the same setback on the east side, it's going to make a difference on that side too, as far as the amount of glass. The house is going to, from my point of view, is going to have to be a tunnel facing north-south, but that's another matter, okay? That's not my purview. I'm looking at is this severance a good severance? And I think that's what this committee has to decide. Is this a good piece of property to have intensification? And with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Thompson, am I correct on this again? What our due responsibility is?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes.
Okay, well, I'll let somebody else talk.
Yes, please come up and state your name and address, and we'll,
Could we get this put up, please, so I know where these people live?
it's not
My
necessary.
name is
No,
Ron
it-
McDonald.
Hold a sec. That's not necessary. Thank you very much. We'll stay with what we've got. If you want, you can look in your planning report, and there's approximately what we did receive, which was some aerial photography of the neighborhood.
That's what that is.
Yep, and there you've got it. But we don't need to have the numbers on it. Yes,
Okay, my name is Ron McDonald. I live at 10 Daleview Crescent.
okay.
I've lived there for 28 years. We don't have storm sewers. Every time it rains out, we have a problem with flooding. Now, you've got a 1.2 meter setback on either side of this property. When it rains out, where are the downspout's going to go? The backyards on either side are going to get flooded. And I don't think anybody I have that problem right now. I don't think anybody's taking that in. 1.2 meters, and you've got 1,500 square feet of roof. That's a lot of water going in the neighbor's backyard.
Thank you for bringing this up. This has been one of my pet peeves for years. But one of the conditions, if the committee grants it, will be the preparation of an overall drainage plan that will look at the drainage coming from this particular property and the adjacent pieces of property. One of the conditions will be that any drainage that comes to this property is going to have to be looked after on the property. Okay, that is what's required now under the building code. Okay, there are many areas in the village of Font Hill and in the town of Pelham where this has not been done in years gone by, but this slowly it's trying to be rectified by the planning department, the building department, and the engineering department. It's just going to take some time, unfortunately.
I'm only referring to this property. You know, like I have a problem with stormwater runoff where I live.
And you're on Elizabeth Street, but you're further to the east, down the hill?
No, I'm on Daleview Crescent, which is a couple
It's on top of
Yeah,
the hill.
okay.
Pretty much the same neighborhood.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same neighborhood, and that,
Size lots, but
yeah.
the thing is, when you look at this house, and you look at the square footage of the roof,
can you,
1.2 meter setback. on
can you,
either
can you
side.
please come? I realize that there's gonna be an increase in the runoff from the, it's just unfortunately, that's a fact of life when you put down an impervious something or rather on a piece of property, the runoff is gonna be greater. One of the comments I had in the planning report, we were looking at the drainage is gonna have to be at meet a certain level. And I'm trying to figure out from my own engineering point of view, is it going to be a 5-year storm, a 10-year storm? And from a climate change point of view, we seem to have more heavy downpours than I ever remember in what I can remember, 60 of my 72 years of existence. So, I do believe that there is going to be more intense rainfall, and I do believe there's going to therefore be more intense runoff. But we're going to have to deal with it, and this gentleman is going to have to deal with it on his property to the satisfaction of the town engineer and the building department, which actually brings in our planning and development department.
So is the town prepared to fill in the lots on either side of it so they don't flood? Because that's what's going to happen.
Well, this is why the drainage area plan is so important. Now, Mr. Rowe, do you want to make comment on this while I'm pontificating?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Preliminarily speaking, what would likely happen is we do need to prepare a grading and drainage plan, and we need to demonstrate that there's no negative impacts on any adjacent properties. So when you create a new lot, you go as a new, you don't retain any riparian rights typically or anything like that. So all stormwater that falls on site is going to have to be collected and discharged to an appropriate outlet. Something like this would probably result in roof leaders that are pointing off the front towards Elizabeth Drive out into the right of way. If there's some concerns with grading, they might also employ something such as a rear yard catch basin. So they'll grade it so it goes to the catch basin, and then they'd run a storm pipe, or they could use a swale. There's a variety of different things that can be employed on site. Typically are on lots that are smaller than this in some scenarios as well.
I have 4 French drains, 25 feet long, and the rain that we get, it can't handle it. And I dug mine below the frost line so it would work in the wintertime. So this is going to be a problem, and nobody's considered it. You're going to flood the neighboring properties every time it rains out.
This is also a concern of mine. Does anyone else wish to speak? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Hi there, my name's Peter Moore. I live on 40 Daleview Crescent. I have an interesting perspective, Mr. Chairman, if I can go through you, and I'd like to have a couple points from the presentation. We've lived there for the past 7 years now. Before that, I actually grew up at 19 Allen Crescent, so I have an interesting perspective. But a couple of things I'd like to ask is with regards to the report and the answers. We obviously have a social dysfunction in our neighborhood if we don't go ahead with this intensification. And another point that I found was very interesting was it wasn't relevant who was going to be living in the dwellings. So I think that goes hand in hand of the social dysfunction that might be going on in our neighborhood right now, which I guess it is based on some of the answers. And I'd like to know what is going to happen with that. I believe that does have a direct impact on the severance, so I'd just like some clarification on that.
Mr. Chair, it's a human rights issue. It's a human rights issue. That's why the tendency is.
Yeah, I think that is something that is beyond our purview. Mrs. Weems, do you want to comment? I really do believe this is beyond our social factors. Shouldn't enter into our discussion, or
It already has.
well, slightly.
Mr. Chairman, through you, so the comment in the planning report was talking about the homogeneity of subdivisions and what happens to them, particularly if they decline. That's where you end up with some social dysfunction. And by having variety, you minimize the risk of that. So that was the commentary that was being provided in the planning report.
Thank you very much. Does that
well then, if the lot is severed, and then whatever might be built, I mean, that is conjecture, I guess, but I think we can all guess pretty succinctly here that that's going to be an Airbnb. And so, well, I think that's what a lot of people are thinking here.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
if I may, that's a house that will be built by a builder, as is very typical. Builders will sell to someone who will come and move in and be a resident in this neighborhood. There's no conjecture and speculation, or just not something that this committee can deal with.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please come forward to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chair, my name is Paula Burketto. I live at 7231 Rolling Acres Crescent in Niagara Falls. I've prepared my notes, but I'll pare them down considerably in respect of the number of people here who also wish to speak and have an opportunity. I grew up at 14 Allen Crescent. My maiden name is Seaman, and I'm here speaking on behalf of my son and his partner, Francis Burketto and Marta Ivanasek, and my husband, Rob Burketto, who are all part owners of the house at 14 Allen Crescent, where I grew up. Until a few years ago when my mother passed, she was probably the third longest resident on Allen Crescent. I'm speaking also on behalf of my uncle, Steve Dyka, who is the longest living resident or residing person on those two streets. I know that the two streets were named after the Brown family, their two children, Alan and Elizabeth, and before my parents built their house in 1961, it was an orchard. So needless to say, I have an emotional tie, but what I've prepared is factual and based on objective comments. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is how the Committee of Adjustment actually goes through and makes their decision regarding applications such as this. And the way that they do that is by looking at the official plan and the 4 tests as set out by the Ontario Association of Committees of Adjustment to measure a minor variance. If any one of these 4 tests fails, then it is my understanding that the application may not go through. In addition, if something is opposed as in the official plan, then it is also my understanding that that could influence the decision of the committee. And while we have heard plenty that this development or that development conforms to the official plan or the regional plan or whatever, we haven't heard the ways that it doesn't conform to the official plan, and I would like to go through those. So the first test in terms of the Committee of Adjustment is whether or not it conforms to the official plan. And the official plan derives its authority from Section 16 of the Planning Act and is the overall master planning document for the town. It contains goals, objectives, and policies to guide future land use and development. When reviewing the plan, it is important to determine if this development will maintain the intent and purpose of the plan. In terms of providing opportunity for increased density, yes, it does. However, and most importantly, Section 2.3 of the official plan discusses urban character, and that hasn't been mentioned yet, and character is the basis of my entire presentation. Under 2.3.1 and 2.3.2, the goal is to protect and enhance the existing urban areas and respect the character of the existing development and ensure that all applications for development are physically compatible with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. It also states that another objective is to maintain and enhance the character and stability of existing and well-established residential neighborhoods by ensuring that the development is compatible with the scale and density of the existing development. This is not. As outlined earlier, the development contravenes the official plan objective. The new development will not physically be compatible nor maintain the character or scale of the neighborhood. The appearance, layout, building footprint, and overall proportion of the building to open space, the building takes up 50% roughly of the lot compared to all the surrounding neighbors, and I've measured every single measurement, side yard setbacks, front yard, building footprint. Most of the homes cover 20% of the lot. So obviously this is not in character. The remaining tests in terms of the Committee of Adjustment are, is it minor in nature? Does it meet the intent of the zoning bylaw? And is it an appropriate development, or is it compatible with the density and character of the surrounding neighborhood? We realize that these may be somewhat subjective, but when we combine all of them together, it really illustrates that this application does not pass the test to measure a minor variance. So is it minor in nature? People are talking about 1.2 to 1.8 or 5 meters to 7 meters. But let's take a closer look at that. Minimum interior side yard from 1.8 to 1.2, front yard 7.7 to 6.19, rear 7.5 to 6.48, and maximum lot coverage from 30 to 45%. That's a lot of impermeable surface to absorb rainwater, no matter where you put the rainwater leaders or what catch basin you tap into, which I didn't actually think was allowed. These are objective numbers that can be used for comparison. When reviewing in isolation, they might seem minor, but when you combine them and compare them to the other properties on Allen and Elizabeth and what is existing, allowing these variances would result in a very small property overwhelmed by the building. The building envelope will dominate the lot and be out of character with the others. The average lot coverage existing is 25%, and I realized I left out 3 lots on Elizabeth that have total length of property line exceeding 150 meters. Huge, huge properties. Some lots are actually 15 to 20% coverage. The building footprint of existing is averaged at 200 meters squared. All right, the proposed development is 212. That's pretty close. But this is on a lot that's only 420 meters squared. The average existing lot size in that subdivision is 1,200 meters. So you're putting a very, large building on a very small property. The property itself will be 25% narrower than the smallest property found on either street and will visually appear as a home that is out of character. The proposed lot has a front yard width of 14 linear meters. The next smallest lot size is 25 meters. It's less than half of the existing. It's out of character. The new property will have a front yard depth of 5 meters, and the existing is 13. Less than half. The front yard will be less than half of the remaining. Even if you flip a 20 Allen and now call the front yard the side or whatever, the front yard is where the front door is. Backyards range from 37 meters to 10 meters in depth with an average of 21 meters. The new property has a backyard depth of 7.5 meters. All these changes, regardless of window openings or whatever, really have an effect on the surrounding properties because now you've got a big building where once was open space. So the poor neighbors on Highland Avenue are confronted with a building wall instead of trees and open space. There's more than one tree that will be affected. I specialize in trees. The above changes to the bylaws in comparison to the surrounding context would collectively be major, not minor. Does it fulfill the intent of the zoning bylaw? Zoning bylaw specifies R1 residential, single detached homes. It does meet this intent. However, it's insensitive to the neighboring owners facing the loss of light, privacy, and views. The development will have adverse negative effect to the point where the intent of the zoning bylaw has not been maintained. The development does not satisfy good planning principles. It therefore fails the 3rd test. The 4th test is it an appropriate development in terms of density and character? As stated in the official plan, any new infill must be compatible with surrounding context. This development will not be. The property will create a solid building mass in close proximity to the existing home at 20 Allen Crescent and the surrounding neighbors. This home has several rooms that face onto the west side of the property, including a family room and a kitchen. They will now be able to look out onto perhaps aluminum siding. These rooms were previously looking into a treed yard and significant open space will now have only a few feet before they are confronted with the sidewall of the house. There is a degree of spaciousness, sunlight, and privacy afforded by the zoning bylaws existing. And even although we talk about what the zoning bylaw numbers are, you need to look at what is existing in surrounding, because the majority of the surrounding houses Their side yard setbacks and front yard setbacks, et cetera, far exceed what's in the zoning bylaw. They set the context for context-sensitive design. In addition, the development must not infringe on the properties adjacent. This is a standard guide in terms of development. This includes damage to foundations due to the close proximity of excavation and site preparation work and damage to trees and fencing. Trees do not know property lines. Their roots and their canopies grow far beyond, and there is undoubtedly going to be significant damage. And although you mentioned that we could plant 2 street trees, that's great. It will take them 45 years to reach the size of the existing trees that'll be taken down. These trees afford the neighbors on Highland Avenue significant landscape screening and buffering. The new trees will take too long to grow in order to make up for any reduction in windows. Now, as I said, it's my understanding that an application need fail only one of the tests. To summarize, the objection of the owners at 14 and 17 Allen Crescent, and I'm guessing the majority of people in this room, although I haven't had a chance to chat with them, this development fails all 4 tests for an application made for relief from the bylaw for zoning setbacks. It fails section 2.31 and 2 of the official plan. The development is incompatible with the established built form and character present and erodes the aesthetics of the streetscape and neighborhood. It is not desirable from a sound planning and public interest perspective. It is not context sensitive. We therefore object to the proposed development. I have no questions.
Mrs. Burketto, thank you very much for the work you've done. You'll be happy to know that your entire letter is between pages 118 and 120 of our agenda. And you'll also be happy to know that I have circled the bottom paragraph at the bottom of page 118. And maybe you should have read this, and I will read it into the record as it stands. The last paragraph on page 118 of our agenda. Section 2.3 of the official plan discusses urban character. And I will be asking our planners to discuss this further after I read this. Under section 2.3.1 and 2.3.2, the goal is to, in quotes, protect and enhance the existing urban areas and respect the character of the existing development and ensure that all applications for development are physically compatible with the character of the surrounding neighborhood, end of quotes. It also states in another objective, in quotes, is to maintain and enhance the character of and stability of the existing and well-established residential neighborhoods by ensuring that development is compatible with the scale and density of the existing development, end of quotes. There was a section in the planning report that did deal with this, but as outlined earlier, this development contravenes those objectives, and I agree with you. But I will let our planners respond and see if they can convince me otherwise. And Mr. Rowe, I will offer you the same opportunity. Mr. Thompson or Ms. Weens?
Through the chair. Page 5 of the planning justification report literally spoke to our opinion of these policies and how it relates. The proposed use in question is identical to the immediate neighborhood, which is part and parcel of keeping in the character. We're of the opinion that it would enhance the character of the neighborhood as long as appropriate urban design considerations are implemented, where I would defer to the conditions that we've proposed on file A28 2019P, speaking to the building elevations. The existing neighborhood is one of predominantly ground-oriented residences on large lots with a lot of lower pitch roof bungalows, mostly along Elizabeth Drive and Allen Crescent. When you get along Highland Avenue, there's a little bit more variety in the built form. There's more 1.5 and 2-story dwellings scattered amongst bungalows. There are lot sizes of different sizes. I literally just measured one that's 370 square meters on Highland Avenue.
R2 zoning, R1 zoning.
It's
on the border doesn't mean you can compare across the border and say, hey, look at their lots are smaller over there. We're in an R1 neighborhood.
Through the chair. Through the chair, planners are looking at the entire neighborhood, not just a static screenshot of a zoning schedule. So when you're walking down the street, there's no fence showing this is an R1 and an R2. So we're looking at the entire neighborhood and how it would impact the community. That's our opinion.
Mr. Rowe, do you have any comments to make with regard to presentation by Mrs. Burkett?
I think that maybe as a point of clarity, and maybe for the benefit of some of the other discussion that's going to come up, is it seems like many people are inferring that the potential building envelope actually represents the physical house, like it's going to be a giant rectangle, which is certainly not the case. I would say in terms of context is more than lot sizes and lot coverages. I think that context is relative to the massing of buildings, which we've demonstrated is consistent with a variety of the houses that are in the neighborhood in terms of massing. I do recognize the lot is smaller than other lots, like that is a fact. It is indeed smaller, but certainly taking guidance from the official plan and working with town staff, I think there's opportunities once you do get that detailed building plan that comes in the elevations, making wise choices in terms of building materials and being strategic with your glazing and, the types of trees that you pick. Street trees, I think are, we have no objection to providing street trees, but our client also has no objection to providing some larger caliper trees even in the backyard. It's not our interest to go and just cut down trees for the sake of cutting down trees. I think that there's, in the spirit of this application, we're proposing a similarly sized dwelling within a neighborhood, and it's going to be reflective of the massing. And I think the character is going to become emulated by the breaks in the building and the way it's designed. So I think some of those comments, I think Ms. Burketto makes some good points. She's certainly well qualified as an OLS to talk about landscaping, and we certainly recognize that. Just in terms of any other conformity with the official plan, as we submitted to the town and the committee, we've also provided a planning justification report that we trust the committee has also read our submissions, in addition to the planning report, which outlines how we feel that it meets the test. So I would suggest that certainly that should be within the purview of the consideration of the committee is our arguments as submitted in writing as well.
Thank you, Craig. Yes, please come to the podium, state your name and your address, and
my name is Jim Morando. My wife and I reside at 5 Highland Avenue, and we're within the 200-foot radius of this property. I'd just like to get a couple of things organized, and while I'm doing that, I'm known as a little bit of a storyteller, so I'm going to tell a story. Hold it down while it... Okay, that makes it much easier for me. I can only do one thing at a time. 1977, my wife and I realized a dream. We bought a lot. We bought a lot at 10 Elizabeth Drive. Remember I said I live at 5 Highland? Well, we bought that lot, we built a home, we raised our kids, and it's a great neighborhood. 15 years ago, as you can see, I've aged considerably, my wife hasn't. Lucky girl. And we decided to move 273 paces up the hill and build our downsized retirement home, our retirement bungalow. And there's only one thing better than the first 33 years, and it's the last 15 years. This is our neighborhood, and we're so lucky to have so many great neighbors living around us. There's a couple of exceptions, okay? But overall, it's a terrific neighborhood. Don't want to see that neighborhood disturbed. It's terrific, great to see the number of people out here tonight because there's a lot of real concerns about this application. Moving with that, I also like to present to anyone, 22 more signatures from people who live on Highland Avenue or Elizabeth Drive who do object and couldn't attend because of the hour of the meeting and other commitments, I assume. But again, 22 additional objections to this. Now, I said I was going to get organized, but I'm doing a poor job of it. But bear with me. Yes. My submission was a submission under a great deal of duress. I was doing it essentially the day that it had to be in. So I scribbled down a whole pile of stuff and sent it in. And I thought that what I said tonight and what everyone said tonight was would be the nature of this meeting, but I guess I was wrong. And I guess I was wrong about something else too. That minor variance applications, these are minor variances or minor changes to the zoning bylaw, not major ones. They have to be, number one, minor in nature. They have to be desirable for the appropriate development of this land. And the general intent of the purpose of the zoning bylaw is maintained.
Sir, we're still considering the severance, the conveyance. If we have to deal with the conveyance first. Do you have a concern related to the conveyance and not the variances? We will deal with the variances further in the meeting. Mrs. Burketto, I let her speak because she dealt with the variances, using the arguments of the variances against the official plan, which is really what we're dealing with currently. I'll be more than happy to listen to you when we're actually dealing with the application.
I want to deal with the variances as they apply to the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, but that is another submission, another application that we're dealing with. Let us finish our deliberations on the conveyance.
Well, I look forward to staying here however long it takes to comment at that time.
That's all
right.
Can you give us another 15 or 20 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have it wound up by then. Is there anybody in the audience who is speaking with regard to the conveyance? In other words, the severing of the property? Yes.
Can I just ask the question, if it's going to be severed and you can't build on it? Because
This is the whole purpose. If the conveyance is not approved by the committee, then the variances will not be considered because you can't. There's nothing to deal with because there are no new property lines being created. So let us deal with the conveyance or the severance. Yes, some of the arguments against the conveyance are related to the variance, but let us deal with the conveyance or the consent of the property, and then we will deal with the variances, which there are 8. There are 8 variances, everyone, and we're going to deal with them one at a time. And I really want to get home for supper myself. So would you allow us to continue on with your comments related to the conveyances? And I thank you, Mr. Mr. Morabito, for coming, but give us this opportunity and let us finish the one deliberation, and then we'll start again, okay?
I just want to say one more thing, and this is not for the record.
It's all on the record, sir.
The first person to greet me when we purchased that lot was a guy by the name of Frank Seaman, who lived that's right, up the hill. So we have a history with each other.
Okay.
Okay. I look forward to coming back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morabito. Jen, you had some comments relative to the application we're considering, which is B11, 2019?
I've been eyeing this chair. Only because I was standing. Okay. My name's Ted Collada, 5 Allen Crescent. There's, regarding the provincial policy statement, there was one mention earlier that social factors weren't involved. But in the beginning of Part 3, how to read the provincial policy statement, it says the provincial policy-led planning system recognizes and addresses the complex interrelationship among environment, economic, and social factors in land use planning. Now, I went through these and figured, okay, are there any environmental benefits? Are there any social benefits and economic benefits to this? And independently, example, social benefits. The vision of Ontario's land use planning, and this is a quote from there, land use planning system says that the long-term prosperity and social well-being of Ontario depends on planning for strong, sustainable, resilient communities for people of all ages and a healthy environment. Now, families are a core of our society. And at Allen Crescent and Elizabeth Drive, the neighborhood is extremely successful, as it is, at being conducive to family living. None of the properties should be severed into the postage stamp size lots. So here on Allen is a place where families are raised, children have a decent sized yard to play in, parents continue to live in the home for as long as they can after the children have grown. This ability to stay in the home is afforded to them because many are bungalows, which gives them one-floor living. There are only 16 houses on Allen. 3 of those are currently owned by people who grew up in the house as children. They're now adults, and after their parents have passed away, they moved back to live into the home themselves. And in the 4th case, it's a grandchild of the original owner that lives in the home. So that's 4 out of 16 homes. That's why I say Allen Crescent is extremely conducive for family living, and all the properties should be maintained in their present form. So it's truly suited for all ages. Now, there's also the environmental factors. I see no environmental benefits to severing 20 Allen Crescent. On the topic of large trees and biodiversity, the provincial policy statement, there's 1.1H, 1.71J, 1.81G. Now, all of they say that first one, healthy, livable, and safe communities are sustained by promoting development and land use patterns that conserve biodiversity and consider the impacts of climate change. The second one says long-term economic prosperity by minimizing negative impacts from the changing climate and considering the ecological benefits provided by nature. And also there's the energy conservation, air quality, and climate change, maximizing vegetation within settlement areas where feasible. In short, it says that the above references are saying that nature and biodiversity for vegetation help human health, helps the economy, helps with climate change, and is recommended. Now, in large lots like the ones we have, you're allowed to plant more trees. And just that leads to biodiversity because each lot owner picks certain species that he has a preference for. So, example, oak, walnut, beech, tulip tree, maple, mulberry, cherry, magnolia, apple, peach, redbud, pawpaw, pine, spruce, tall cedars, Nootka cypress. Those are examples of species that are on either my property, the property behind, or either side. So that's just 4 properties in our neighborhood. And the neighborhood as a whole has a lot more trees. And the large lots of Fonthill offer a wealth of trees that are tended by the homeowners. And we shouldn't depend on the town to provide our tree cover for us. Small lots produce no large trees because there's no room and certainly no biodiversity. In addition, we should not depend on the town as our only source of large trees. There's a recent article said that 36 million trees are removed from urban and rural communities in the United States annually. Now, it went on to say that, in quotes, if we continue on this path, cities will become warmer, more polluted, generally more unhealthy for inhabitants. Now, even if we reduce that number to 1/10, given the population difference between America and Canada, Fonthill is blessed with soil where trees grow, and apart from many areas. I moved to Newmarket once. I grew up in Niagara area, moved to Newmarket, drove into town, and the first thing I thought was, not even the trees are old here. So, now, that's the ecological part. Are there any economic benefits to the proposed project? I've seen no significant economic benefits except for the short-term limited dollars made by the developer. I would argue that if the proposed project goes through, it opens the door for other such severances and the town loses more of its uniqueness and character, becoming best ordinary and certainly a less desirable place to live in and raise a family. Fonthill is known for its character. People move here because of it, even down to its variety in home styles. We don't tend to have the cookie-cutter homes, especially in the older subdivisions. The provincial policy statement again says, long-term economic prosperity should be supported by encouraging a sense of place, by promoting well-designed built form and culture planning, and by conserving and helping define character. So now, we did have one example of the story a few minutes ago. I will be brief with this one, my story, okay? I do live at 5 Allen Crescent. I know that those people on Allen, they take pride in their homes and belonging to the community. And I'll emphasize this with my comparisons. Now, in our case, 5 Allen, it was an infill lot. New construction, built in 1999. It's located behind the historic Brown House that was built in 1864. Now, our lot was severed from the Brown House in 1990, sold to Marion Damude. Damudes did not build. Angeline, my wife, and I purchased it in 98. But the story of 5 Allen and what's proposed for 20 Allen couldn't be any further apart. When we were planning and designing our home, we had to obviously abide by the regular bylaws. Plus, we had an additional restrictive covenant that when we purchased the land, there was a clause that put in by the reptules that said that no building shall be erected having more than 1 story. No 2-story building shall be erected. So in essence, we couldn't build a 2-story house on our own land. But we could understand that because it's all part of belonging to this town. We could understand that the clause was important to the reptiles so that in the future house that was built on the lot would not dominate over the Brown House. Also, it'd integrate well with the neighborhood, as well as most of the others were either bungalows or side splits. In addition, the severed lot was made to be the same size as the others on the street, even though it did not have to be as large. When all the other lots were created in the 50s and 60s, there were this issue they had to be because of the septic beds. That was not the case with ours in the 90s. However, the lot we have is similar to the others. It's 80 by 155, again, for the sake of conformity. To assist in making our choices, making our bungalow integrate well with the other homes, we chose to have, there's no east side windows overlooking the brown side, except for a couple basement windows. There were two mature street trees. Now, placed the house, and one of those trees was in the way in the driveway. And the builder told us that. And he said, okay, you've got this tree's in the middle of your driveway. And I said, okay, well, no, it's not, because we were going to accommodate the driveway for that tree. So that tree stayed. So we had two trees in front of our yard. Most of the homes were brick all around, back and front, not just brick and siding on the back. So we did the same, brick all around. We chose a lighter shingle color so that it would recede and not dominate. Now, these are just some examples. It's our situation. But what I see from 20 Allen is not the case. I see an owner that's making choices more of personal benefit and disregarding the impact on the neighbors. And so I do have so what do you do with 20 Allen Crescent? Now, to the Committee of Adjustments, now when I say we, that's my wife and I, register our opposition and respectfully ask that you deny all the requested variances for the reasons that we and the neighbors are presenting to you. To the owner of 20 Allen Crescent, we would encourage him to follow the lead of the owners of 2 Allen, 10 Allen, and 11 Elizabeth. These are all houses that had substantial renovations in recent years by their owners. Owners that had older properties, but they knew they had homes worth putting money into, creating a better homes for themselves and the town. Right now, 20 Allen has the ingredients to make a renovation work and result in a very desirable home. It's dated, but it's a bungalow. It has space inside and out, double garage, and something that desired for modern families. Plus, it's in a great location. I do have to disagree. There's one comment that was made about traffic, that it was a local road. Elizabeth, yes, it's a local road, but it's a road that where people travel up that area past this house, and they're going onto Daleview from Pelham Street. They're going on to subdivisions beyond. Plus, there are no sidewalks in there. People walk in this area. They walk their dog, they walk for pleasure, they walk downtown, they walk to the convenience store. This would lead to more street parking. And I don't think you can help it with modern living, because what happens is people have stuff and they put it in their garage, and then that leaves no room for the car. But the builder, that's not his problem. So, but it's a matter of, that's the social aspect. Another area we used to live in, it happened there. It was in another town, another time. But they had so much stuff in here. They had furniture in there. My wife and I used to call them the garage sitters, because the car wasn't there. It was either in the garage or on the street. And putting it on the street is going to be a problem. So I think...
Do you have any questions for our planners? Do you want clarification, anything stated?
Clarification,
I
well...
can let you know that your entire submission takes up pages 109 to 115 of our agenda. And I really thank you, because I actually did, it's one of those that I actually circled and said, this is one of the things I have to mention. And you did mention it very well in that, now I've lost my page, but I know I had it. You gave me a really good history, and I appreciate that for what actually is the development that has occurred. And it actually is borne out in some of the aerial photographs that were included in our report from the planning department. I think the first one was 1950s, then we saw 1960s, and eventually we saw the townhouses built on the old Fonthill Public School. So I really do appreciate your submission. And I'm sure the committee does also. But are there any points of clarification that you would like to have our planners or?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
Because the way I went about this, it was different. It's almost like the planning department and the builder, they were going through their checklist. Does this apply? Check, yes, no, etc. Is it on a floodplain? Is it next to a quarry? No. Okay, then we can build it. Well, there's a lot of the social factor, and the social factor is what I think a lot of the people here are here for, and saying, well, no, deal with the social part. That's why I went to that first part and said how to read the provincial policy statement. And that far, it's that where it says, okay, you have to look at social, you have to look at environmental and the economic benefits. And I do believe that there are, just one final statement, then I'll leave, get out of the way. Okay, there are good examples in Fonthill. There are examples of how the provincial policy statement and how it has been applied. There's the East Fonthill development, there's the Fonthill lumber site. Now, those are good examples of intensification. And however, the development of 20 Allen is disruptive and it's not beneficial to the neighborhood at all. We, the neighbors, we choose to live in here, this neighborhood, just as someone that wants to move into the Fonthill Yards chooses to live there. Now, so I think that pretty much sums it up, I think. So.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, I got to push the button again. Thank you very much, Mr. Galano. Barbara Curtis, do you have anything you'd like to say with regard to the presentation? I'm particularly interested in your comments related to how to read the provincial policy statement, which Mr. Mercado has actually put, not Mr. Mercado, I'm sorry, Mr. Gelato has stated on page 110 of our agenda. If you want to give us your interpretation versus his interpretation, I'd
Mr. Chair,
greatly.
through you, certainly we do look at the provincial policy statement, the explanatory notes, sorry, I can't speak, at the beginning is definitely helpful. And it talks about reading the whole provincial policy statement in its entirety. And so when we do look at any planning application, we do consider the provincial policy statement. With respect to the social considerations, those are definitely important ones, and we have looked at that, and they are discussed in our report. So I just think in the consideration of time here, I don't know that you want me to reiterate those again, but they are in our report. And the report does summarize kind of the policy tests with respect to the provincial policy statement.
Craig, do you want to elucidate?
Briefly, yeah. So our planning justification report gives a complete rundown of all the applicable plans and policies that go to this. So we've reviewed the PPS in its entirety and provided commentary. I think anecdotally, for the benefit of the committee and the residents in attendance tonight, we talked about those three kind of general tests: economic, social, environmental. Economic, of course, additional development in the municipality, additional tax base. Social, I think the value here is you're providing additional housing. From what I'm hearing, it's an exceptional neighborhood, so it's a great location for a new family to move in, new friends. People are going to participate in Summerfest. And why? Okay, please, thank you. I'm just going to leave my comments at that. That's fine. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to bring something forward to the committee before we turn it over to the committee to ask questions?
Randy Willinga, 8 Elizabeth Drive. That is the old brown house. I'll be really quick. 20 years ago we moved there. We raised our kids there. It's a wonderful neighborhood. If we wanted to live in a neighborhood that was basically shoehorned like that, we had that choice. We could do that. And I think it would be a shame to convert our neighborhood to that. You're saying that this is just one. There was a point about setting a precedent, but we know that if this is allowed, then couldn't I do it on my property, or Ted do it on his? You can convert slowly the whole neighborhood using this justification.
Thank you very much for your comments. Once again, I forget to push the button. Does anyone else have any comments to bring forward to the committee regarding the consent applications? Committee members, do you have any questions for staff or any comments you wish to make regarding the the submissions that we've received and the planning reports that we're currently looking at. Bernie, any questions you wish to ask the planners or relative to this application?
Yes, I spent a great.
You had it.
I did. Is it on? Yeah. I spent a great deal of time reading this file. This is a very big file, and there's a lot of people with a tremendous amount of interest in this development. And as I see it, Pelham, Font Hill, where I was born, where my dad was born, is a small little community that's bulging at the seams. And we've got lots of land around our community for development. And we're asked to build 300 homes in the Pelham area in the next few years. So as I look at this application, I think, well, you know what? That's great. We can put another house in our town and people live in it and kids and so on. But then after I started to read it and I looked where it is, and I thought, well, this doesn't meet the criteria that I'm looking for. You got a 2,096 square foot house on a little 432 meter lot. So my first concern was me living on Elizabeth Drive when I was a kid for 10 years, living there, was the water coming down Elizabeth Drive. Well, then they built those new townhouses across the street from our house, number 4, and the water came down with such force that it went over the bank and flooded the brand new townhouses. So the town of Pelham, in their wisdom, built curbs all the way down Elizabeth Drive and around the corner and down to Pelham Street on both sides. Well, this was tremendous because the water then couldn't get over the hill and flood out those homes. So that's great. So that was one thing that they did. But now what I see is unless you're going to bottle the water that comes off this roof and sell it, you're going to have hundreds of gallons of water going out the front of your driveway, as you suggested, and down Elizabeth Drive. Well, that water is going to go down around the corner where the curbs are, but then it's going to wind up down at Pelham Street. And it's going to flood the homes down on Emmett Avenue and down on Highway 20, or Pelham Street. So this lot will not have enough clear land to absorb the rainwater from the roof and driveway of this development, unless you're going to capture the water and, like I say, bottle it and sell it. So as I see it, Elizabeth Drive doesn't need any more water going down. It needs storm sewers going down. So the town has to invest in storm sewers so we can get this water off of Pelham Street. In the wintertime, when the water goes down Pelham Street, it freezes. And I know because I've been up and down Pelham Street, or pardon me, Elizabeth Drive, and that causes problems. So we don't need more water on our streets going into homes and basements. When I was a kid at number 4, the house next door, number 2, his sump pump ran steady. Why did it run steady? Well, because the groundwater from up on top of the hill, up Daleview Crescent and all the rest of them up there by the cemetery, all of that water comes down into the aquifer and it comes down through Allen Crescent. And then it got into number 2, their basement, and their sump pump runs steady. Well, we're at number 4, we didn't have that problem. And I don't know why to this day we didn't have that problem. But the point is, we need to go to the source of the water. Where is the water coming from? It's coming from the heavens. Great. Where does it go? It goes onto the lawn, into the grass, and it gets absorbed. And that's fine. And that's where it should be. So, in my opinion, when I look at this size of the house, it's too big for that particular lot, in my opinion. And then, of course, when I look at the official plan and I look at the five the 5 areas of concern that you're looking for, you exceed all 5. You want more than all 5. If it was one of the 5, I could probably agree with it. 2, maybe 3, I'm not sure. 5, whoa. I'm not sure what's going on, but I personally find an objective to this particular development having such a big roof home on such a small lot. So if you want to condense the size of the house down to about the size of a 20-foot trailer, I might agree with it. Okay, sir? Shut it off.
Bill, do you have any questions you want to ask the planners or any comments you wish to make?
With respect to the severance alone, because somewhere along the line we chose either not to do the variance first or to do the 2 applications concurrent. So that if you look at a severance to add a lot to an area, in principle, that severance can work, technically, because it meets most, if not all, of the planning policies and good planning practices of 2020. And it's hard to argue against that technically until you get into the softer side of such applications as elucidated by Miss or Mrs. Burketto. Being against infill applications is like being against motherhood. It's a good thing almost by definition. Once you get into the soft side of what a neighborhood is, and that which can be disruptive, you get into problems because it's not measurable. It's a feeling. It's a look. It's a feel. And as Ms. Burketto pointed out, the provincial policy statements address that head on. They have to be addressed. This neighborhood, and I'm sorry, nobody has defined what this neighborhood is. Does the neighborhood end at Highland Avenue? Does it go as far as Pelham Street? How far south does it go? Is this an enclave or is it a neighborhood? To me, this is an enclave within a neighborhood that goes to Hay Street and Canberra and Pelham and Strathcona. That's the neighborhood. This area that we're talking about, Allen Crescent and this section of Elizabeth Drive, is an enclave within that neighborhood. And the reason I say that is because the built form, the lot size, the character, the front yard setbacks, the whole 9 yards of what I consider the neighborhood is very consistent. And I think if you consider, if you'll indulge me for a minute, if you consider the wider context of the definition of neighborhood, you get a better chance. And our planner said, this is a snapshot. This isn't the neighborhood. You've got to go through the neighborhood where you'll find different size lots, different built forms, different side yards. And I couldn't agree with them more. The reason that this neighborhood exists goes back to the history that's been explained. There were no sewers in the 60s. So you had to have large lots to accommodate septic systems. What came out of that was a neighborhood that should be the envy of every municipality in the province of Ontario. It exemplifies what a neighborhood is and should be. It's stable. The generations, as the generations go through and the new buyers come in, that stability stays, it maintains. It doesn't take much to disrupt a neighborhood of this stability. And it is, with all due respect, the equity that you people and all the rest of the people, if we consider the neighborhood size that I'm suggesting, the equity that you people have in your neighborhood is huge. And I'm not talking just money. I'm talking soft side. I'm talking the soft stuff, what makes up a community. The developer has an equity in his property, and he has all the rights in the world to come into this town and ask for this severance. I'm intentionally not referring to the variance situation. Unfortunately, your neighborhood stands the potential of being an anachronism. Because your land values are going to exceed your home values, and you will be getting more knocks on the door like this, with houses with 100-foot frontages. Famous comment in the planning industry, the thin edge of the wedge. Not going there, but in the planning report, a couple of comments were made that, and please don't anybody in any way, shape, or form take what I'm about to say as personal or the comments were written by a professional. I'm reading from the comments by a professional. It's a quote. Given the proximity to downtown Font Hill, commercial uses along Highway 20 West, public schools and large lot sizes present, listen, it would not be unreasonable to assume there may be additional intensification pressures in the coming years or decades if population growth continues as forecast. I want you to internalize that. Planning policies are, by definition, results-oriented. A planning policy says that the town of Fonthill shall, that's prescriptive. That's not voluntary. Have an intensification rate of 25%. This is the new growth policy. What the planning policy doesn't say, and it doesn't instruct the planning professionals of any municipality, as to how to achieve that. The planning policy does not say thou shalt retroactively go into a plan of established neighborhoods and split up lots to achieve your densities. It gives the planning professionals all sorts of options other than that. And I would suspect that if you really sat and had a long conversation, that the idea of going into well-established, large lot plans of subdivision is the last one on the list. Because stability and social networking of areas like this are mandatory if you're going to have an advanced, social, stable network.
Okay, Bill, so what's the conclusion?
Without prejudicing the application, Mr. Chairman, I think the conclusion is the severance our problem, or is it the minor variance application our problem? Because if the severance, let's assume for a minute, that this committee, as it's constituted tonight, says, in principle, intensification is most acceptable and technically meets all the policies. But it's subject to the approval of the minor variances. And the minor variances, if this lot was 7,000 square feet or 700 meters in size, we'd have a hard time turning the severance down. But it's only 400 meters, so the variance is required. So is the principle of the severance wrong? Do the means justify the ends? My big problem is the disruptive nature of the proposal. And it centers around the variances. It doesn't center around the severance. This gentleman here who created his lot in 1998, I don't think any of you objected to that. It was tastefully done. It was properly done. It fit into the community. He didn't require any variances. If this application for severance is approved, and we move on to the variance side of this thing, the equity you have in your neighborhood and the equity the developer has in his proposal demands that the members of council of this town have equity in the proposal, which demands a rezoning of this application. I think the variances are outside the scope, and I agree with a whole bunch of other people that there are real problems with the variances. The policies that are being presented here are driven by other policies. In the provincial statement, there's the official plan, the growth plan for Niagara. The ultimate decision makers of policy in this town are the politicians. If this was a rezoning application where council had to deal with the differences between what it might happen on this lot and the rest of the community, would they pick the community or would they pick the developer?
Decision of council, Bill.
I understand that. But the thing I'm trying to get at here, vis-a-vis my previous comments, is if this is, and I hate the term, and I don't want to use it, if this is the beginning of a new policy for the redevelopment of this neighborhood, as I define the neighborhood, including this enclave, if this application is the precursor of the redevelopment of a stable, economic, viable neighborhood, that if council is confronted with the issue of there's no storm drains in this neighborhood, we can't afford to put storm drains in this neighborhood. The tax base isn't here. That creates a whole set of problems. So council says, how do we get that tax base to put stormwater in here? The new policy says, this application does not set precedents. But if this application and its variances are approved, and the house across the street with 100-foot frontage is sold for $750,000, subject to severance, and it comes before the committee or for a severance, and somebody says, it's not a precedent, but you did it across the road. Where do we go? Every municipality in the world needs money. The resources are limited. The sources of funding are really limited. And they're limited basically to property tax.
Conclusion, sir.
Regarding the severance,
Bill, I want to, one thing.
Just hang.
Look at the criteria. We are to consider the Planning Act and the criteria in the Planning Act.
I understand.
And I'm looking at G specifically.
As a planner, Mr. Chairman, as an ex-planner, and as an ex-developer, I am quite familiar. Here's the issue. We turn down the severance, and the developer says, I'm appealing. The reasons for the turn down of the severance have to be stated by law, by this committee. You just can't say, I don't like it. The interpretation of official plans, regional plans, are an interesting exercise. So, we turn down the severance. He appeals, it goes to the appeals committee. We give reasons. He has the expertise of a professional planner. And he just takes our reasons on and burns them. And the appeals committee said, whoa, there's a committee of adjustment that didn't know what they were doing or saying. Because this guy can interpret an official plan and growth plans, and he has the staff behind him at the appeal committee. Appeals committees don't like to go against staff reports. So the appeals committee says, yeah, you know what? The intensification in this situation is fine. Nobody gets a whack at whether the variances are okay at that appeal level. If this committee were to approve the severance and we spend another hour discussing the variances, which give rise to the really disruptive aspect of this application, and this committee turns down the variance application, the severance application dies. He can still appeal, but he's appealing two things. Because we've turned down the variances, he's got to appeal that to get access to his severance. I have 47 pages of objections to the variances in this application. I think this is just plain wrong. But we have to be cognizant of the fact of how we proceed from here.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we, I have my own things, and I have a tendency to agree with Bill. The way the Planning Act is and the way the planners are and the way the appeals work, I've watched the Ontario Municipal Board turn down some things, and I've seen them approve some things, and yeah, it's, I'm not a planner. I have read what we are supposed to take into account when we as a committee are supposed to be dealing with these things. And one of the things that got me was that one section that, it was G, and the criteria. In considering the draft plan, we're supposed to have regard for. And G says restrictions or proposed restrictions, if any, on the land proposed to be subdivided. Well, to me, variances to the bylaw are restrictions because we're actually changing the law. But yet, I have to agree with Bill that that's probably not enough to turn the severance down. What also bothers me on the way through is I'm looking at all the things and I'm thinking, intensification. We seem to be using intensification as a justification for severing properties in established neighborhoods. And I also had an agreement with Bill on what is the neighborhood, because I'm looking through the planning report and it says in the neighborhood, and it says it was shown on Schedule 5 of the zoning bylaw. And I'm looking at the zoning bylaw, there's Schedule 5, right? It doesn't show me a neighborhood boundary. This neighborhood could technically extend from, probably Regional Road 20 to as far south as Pancake Lane. And if you take those properties into account and you look at the dimensions and square footage of those properties, a lot of the discussion by the planners in their report, yeah. And I also agree with Bill that the Elizabeth Drive Allen Crescent is an all, what do you call it? An enclave.
An enclave.
An
It's an
enclave
enclave.
within a larger neighborhood. This was not discussed in the planning report. So people, your committee is stuck with a terrible decision. If we agree with the severance, we're wrong. If we don't agree with the severance, we're wrong. And this is where we've been asked by council, we've been appointed by council to solve these dilemmas for council. And in actual fact, if the gentleman really wants to develop his piece of property the way it is, what he's proposing, I agree with you, Bill, that he needs to go through the bylaw process. And let council decide. And I know that we're charged with making a decision, and I'm at a loss. I'm, to be quite honest, the residents, I'm really against the severance, but I'm more against the variances. And don't thank me, because I've spent the last 3 days and nights thinking about this. Mrs. Burketto, you have a comment? I'd be more than happy to listen, because I really appreciated your submission.
You had said initially when we started that this would be considered concurrently.
No, that's my problem.
Yeah.
That is my problem. It's not being considered concurrently. Now, can this committee make it? I ask.
Holly, we've both had advice from our secretary treasurer, who's not able to attend tonight.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have spoken with the Secretary Treasurer previous. It is my understanding with our conversations that the committee would hear the consent first, the consent application first. Consents are required to go first. Certainly, if the consent was granted, you would move on to the minor variances, and then you would be able to consider those minor variances. You can consider those applications, and you can consider each minor variance individual. I believe one of the applications, for example, has 3 minor variances. You don't have to approve all 3 of them. You can approve potentially 1, 2, or all 3 of them, or refuse them. If you were to hear potentially the minor variances first, the reason that wouldn't be permitted is because once you've approved a minor variance, it does run with the land, and that's why you are required to hear the consent first. If the consent is not granted, the minor variances would then need to have a technical refusal. Does that help clarify?
No. Can I ask, through you, Mr. Chairman, can I ask the planning director a question of clarification?
Certainly.
On this matter?
Certainly.
Madam Director, am I correct in the law that if this severance were to be granted by this committee and the variances refused, the application in total is dead?
Mr. Chair, through you, if the severance is approved and the variances are denied, the application is not dead. The proponent has the ability to appeal the variances or has the other alternative of applying for a zoning bylaw amendment. But the decision of the consent would be provisionally granted, and he has a year to clear the conditions of the consent. If those consent conditions are not cleared within the year, then the consent application dies.
Thank you. That clarifies what I previously said. That if the severance is granted, conditional on approval of the variances, and the variances are not approved, then the applicant must either appeal that decision and justify not just the severance, but he has to justify the variances. And I think that's as much of an issue as anything. Or he can apply for a rezoning, and I think that's where this municipality has to put some skin in the game, because they understand, as municipal councilors, they should understand what's going on and what the threats, opportunities, the SWOT of this neighborhood is. They have to understand that this application is an indication of what can and probably will continue to happen. I don't know how many people in this room would turn down $600,000, $700,000 for their $800,000 as time goes on. There are, but once it starts, if I can tell you or you that if I can put a building lot together of 200-foot frontage feet and a depth of 200 feet, I'm not going to build a big house on it. I'm going to build about 12 townhouses. Now, the municipality and the members of council of this municipality have to understand the jeopardy that this neighborhood, and I mean the big definition, is in. But it puts them in a conundrum because the services are 50 years old. Your sanitary.
Water mains are even older.
Water mains are even older. There are no storm drains. So you people come to the municipality and say, my trunk sewer just collapsed. What are you going to do about it? Well, are we going to fix 200 feet of trunk sanitary sewer? Or are we going to repair 3 kilometers of trunk sanitary sewer and water main? And while we're digging up the streets, are we going to put storm drains in? This municipality cannot afford it.
Yes, Mrs. Burketto, please come to the microphone and offer your wisdom.
I'm not sure that I need a microphone, but I will go there. I believe that the policy stated that we're aiming for 300 new units. How many new units are going in the development that borders Rice Road? And they have new infrastructure. That's my only comment. Perhaps we can move on from the intensification because we don't need to.
Okay, Mrs. Burketto, what I'd like to do, I'd like to ask Barb Weens to express what intensification means. Can we consider East Font Hill new development being intensification? Or are we looking as intensification, looking at the pre-East Font Hill urban boundary and trying to get 300 new units in that general area?
Mr. Chair,
I was going to ask a question on intensification, by the way.
certainly, Mr. Chair, through you, the infill and intensification can be one lot, or it could be a multiple unit development. The threshold of 300 new dwelling units with a corresponding with a 15% intensification rate, which is the policy in our official plan, applies to the established residential neighborhood areas. It does not apply to what we call greenfield, such as the new development areas. Those areas are being developed at a density much higher. They are achieving overall a density of 50 units and persons per hectare. So the very low intensity target of 15%, understanding that if I step back, the growth plan requires us to achieve a 40% intensification target in our established residential areas across the region. And so what the region has done is it said, Pelham, you're somewhat unique in terms of having a lot of low density neighborhoods and stable neighborhoods. We're only going to require you to achieve 15%, and other municipalities are going to make up that difference. And so that's where the 15% intensification target comes from for Pelham. It is something that's established by the region of Niagara as part of their conformity with the growth plan. And some municipalities have higher intensification targets than that. St. Catharines is at 80% because they do not have any greenfield. They are all intensification. Other municipalities have 60 or 50%. But across the region, we have to achieve a 40. And in Pelham specifically, it's 15%. And that translates into about 300 dwelling units in our existing built neighborhoods.
So I just want to ask a question. So what's actually going on at the intersection of Highway 20 and Station Street? That's basically an infill that looks against that 300 units.
Mr. Chair, through you, that's the Fallen Hill Lumberyard site?
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
That is actually not an intensification site or an infill site. Because it was industrial land and not residential, so it's treated somewhat differently in the policy context.
Oh, okay.
Following that thought, the old arena site, is that intensification?
Mr. Chair, I would ask you that you take control of this public.
Let's get back to this particular neighborhood and this particular subdivision.
Can I get an answer to my question?
I think you're beyond the.
No, I'm not, because if you're dealing with the SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to this community, and our staff is mandated to find 300 units in the existing residential neighborhoods.
Doesn't say that.
Yes, it does. That's what she just told you.
It's within urban boundaries, not existing.
Your urban.
Excuse me, please do not argue with the chair.
The urban boundaries of municipalities aren't going to change ever. Is the old arena site classified as intensification?
The old arena site, it was designated open space in our official plan. It has been changed to residential when council went through a process and they changed it to residential. They went through a zoning bylaw amendment. It is in the area that's defined as being part of the built boundary. And so, yes, it is included within the intensification area.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, okay, gentlemen, do we have any more questions? Craig, do you want to have any? I'm to the point where I'm not exactly sure whether we really do have jurisdiction on this, or we should actually be. I would actually use one of the favorite words I didn't used to like when I was working for a municipality. I would like to defer this until I find out more equivocally whether we can actually consider these applications concurrently. Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one comment that I will offer is that we followed the protocol for the township and had a pre-consultation meeting for this, at which point we were directed that it was considered appropriate to file for a minor variance and a consent application. We have prepared a planning justification report, completed archaeological studies, as well as, attended the public meeting. I've read through all of the public comments as well. I think it's quite clear. I'm a former regional employee, so I'm a regional planner. I'm well versed in the provincial policy statement and the regional plan, and the director of planning is correct. These lands are designated within the built-up area, which is where the region directs development to go. In my professional opinion, the proposed application, the severance, and the variances are considered appropriate development for the site. With regard to that, there are only 2 variances that are actually technically required. And that's been highlighted in the staff report as well. The issues at hand tonight are about the severance and about allowing the frontage and the lot area. The committee is free to make any decisions they want on any of those other elective variances, but the fact is they are not required to facilitate the development of the proposed parcel. So I'd just like to highlight that. And I do have concerns about us being directed to go to council. We're aware of the growth going on in Pelham. A 1-year time frame to take forward a controversial zoning amendment is likely not going to be completed in a year, so we'll be prejudiced on our ability to satisfy any conditions of approval of the consent. We feel that we've complied with what the direction of staff was, and our client would be prepared to challenge this at the Ontario Municipal Board, or sorry, the LPAT is what it's called right now. And we would just respectfully request that the variances be considered as they are with the consent this evening and a decision be rendered. I don't believe from our perspective and from my client's perspective that deferring this any further is really going to result in anything. I think that the neighborhood's position is quite clear. I heard them loud and clear this evening. I don't believe their position is going to change, nor do I believe staff's position is going to change, and mine isn't as well. So I just would suggest that perhaps we can carry on and satisfy both the public and our client and render a decision if possible, please.
Mr. Chairman, through you to the planning director. I know you're not a lawyer, but you've got enough experience both in private practice and public practice. Are there any impediments to this committee, in your professional opinion? Are there any impediments to this committee considering these 3 applications concurrently?
Mr. Chair, as the Secretary Treasurer indicated, you do have 3 separate applications. You will have to make 3 separate decisions on each of those applications, but you can consider them as a whole package, but they need to be 3 separate decisions because there are 3 separate applications. There's one application for the consent, there's an application for minor variance on the remnant parcel, and there's an application for minor variance on the proposed parcel.
So by that, I'm going to suggest that the answer is no, there's no impediment to us. There are procedurals that have to be met.
Correct.
But when this committee considers a severance and at the same time considers the 2 variances that are required to give meaning to the severance, we're at liberty to do that.
I believe you are, yes.
Mr. Chairman, having said that, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to make a motion that the 3 applications, A28 2019P, A29 2019, and B11 2019 be considered concurrently for the purposes of reaching a decision on this matter. I'll make that motion.
Do I have a seconder?
think I need just a bit more clarification on that, Bill.
Not me.
Okay, what Bill is actually saying is, instead of looking just at the severance application, what we will do is we'll do all of them at the same time. So we could basically go and say, yes, we can grant, we may end up granting B11. And we look at the conditions that are in front of us, and yes, you know, what we do is we make the granting conditional upon the satisfaction of the variances. And if I have this correct, Barb, if we do put conditions on the variances, they have to be satisfied within a year, if possible.
Mr. Chair, no, the variances run with the land. It's the condition of
Well, it's the condition of the,
consent that has a year to fulfill.
okay, so the consent may have, variances must be approved.
So just in terms of making it easier for the Committee of Adjustment, you can consider the approval of the consent and the two variances for lot frontage and lot area concurrently, if that makes it any easier. The variances for the side yards and can be dealt with separately. But you do need to, in order to create the consent, you need to consider the variance for the lot frontage and lot area, because those are needed to fulfill the consent.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the approval of a consent subject to or conditional upon approval of variances is a valid approach to this conundrum. In other words, and I want to make this specifically clear because otherwise I'm going down the road of deferment. If the consent is granted conditional upon a lot area variance and a frontage area variance, and those two variances are not approved, then this gentleman has his democratic rights of appeal to give effect to that decision. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if he doesn't, or he applies for a zoning bylaw amendment, if the appeal fails on the variances, the severance fails.
That's correct.
Does anybody have a problem, an issue with that?
Basically, I would like, currently, I would like personally to have this matter deferred so I can get a little more advice from our secretary treasurer. Or I would like the applicant to withdraw the three applications and approach from the point of view of zoning bylaw. I hate to say it, Craig, but that's, in this particular case, I think I could argue that we do not, we've looked at the Planning Act, we've looked with what we've had regard to look at, we've looked at the official plan, we've looked at what we're regard to have to, and my own opinion is that we have not looked, or our planning department, with all due respect, I don't believe this, but with all due respect, I think our planning department has not looked at the fabric of the community as it exists. And we're asking, the owner of the property is asking us to actually look at changing the character of the neighborhood. And I agree with my friend here, Bill, that if this is granted, it is the thin edge of the wedge for the neighborhood and the enclave in that neighborhood. And that's where I'm having some difficulty. And this is why I'm thinking I think this needs to be addressed, and the intensification issues related to the existing zoning bylaw need to be better addressed. And that's something that council needs to do as part of either a comprehensive review of the zoning bylaw or a site-specific zoning bylaw. And I'm sorry, I'm not a planner.
Madam Director, in your experience, have you run across an instance where a committee of adjustment doesn't feel competent to make a decision on a severance and/or variances because they feel that it's beyond their jurisdiction? Is the committee, can the committee, in your opinion, turn down this application, not defer it? Can we turn it down because we feel we don't have the jurisdiction?
Mr. Chair, through you, certainly you have the jurisdiction to deal with consent applications and minor variance applications. With respect to the minor variance applications, if you feel, and is one of your reasons, is that these are not minor and that they more appropriately need to be addressed through a zoning bylaw amendment, that is a valid reason for refusal.
It is.
Yes. For the consent application, you have jurisdiction to deal with that. If you do not feel that the consent satisfies all the criteria of Section 5124 of the Planning Act, then please state that. If you feel the consent does not satisfy any of the policy requirements of the official plan, then you also need to state that in your reasons. The official plan does speak to things like character, so you can make reference to that in your reasons if you choose to refuse the consent application. You certainly have jurisdiction to deal with all of these applications. That is the authority that's granted to the Committee of Adjustment through the Planning Act. And if your reasons are that you feel that this is dealt with through some other means, such as a zoning bylaw amendment for those variances, then that's a valid reason. With respect to whether or not this is better dealt with as a plan of subdivision, that one it would be hard to justify. So I think you have to come up with a reason that it's not in conformity with something in terms of Planning Act requirements, official plan policies, and so forth.
So if we grant the severance and turn down the variances based on the fact that we feel that the subject matter of the variances not be better dealt with, but in absolute terms should be or must be dealt with through a rezoning. I don't want to present a case that says, yeah, we'll grant the severance, but the variances should be dealt with by a rezoning, and somebody says, that's not definitive enough. That's optional. Somebody else is going to make a decision here. I don't want to go there. I want to be able to say, and I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you again in your professional opinion, in absolute terms, can this committee say, I will grant this gentleman's right to sever the lands but I will not approve the variances. They must be dealt with through a rezoning application of council. Is that a legitimate approach?
When you come up with your reasons, for the variances, you have to apply your 4 tests.
Yes?
As to whether or not.
Oh, I've got pages and pages and pages of that.
So, and if it fails to meet the 4 tests, then the other opportunity and option available is a zoning bylaw amendment.
All right, we could be here until midnight if that happens. Mr. Chairman, move deferment.
Do you have a seconder? Bernie seconds it. Time and place.
Sign a die.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if the committee passes a motion to defer, I do understand that this committee would be seized of that application, and you would be the panel that would rehear it when the applicant, if they chose to come back to the committee, that you would be the members hearing it. I would like to highlight that staff had suggested for application file B11, 2019, that a condition of the consent would be that the approval of the minor variance for application A28, 2019P for approval of the minimum lot area and minimum lot frontage obtain final approval, and that the minor variance application for A29, 2019P inclusive would also obtain final approval for the severance within that 1-year period. I think there was question of that, but that was a recommendation for staff had brought forth to the committee, if that's helpful.
There's a motion on the table to defer the application, sign a die. Which means we don't know when, we know where, but we don't know when. It could be a month from now, it could be 6 months from now, that you all get re-notified that we're going back at this. All right, so sign a die means we don't know.
Through you, Mr. Chair, for a motion to defer, would there be something that you are looking for? Is it more information from the planning department that I would note down that would trigger when the applicant would know when to come back, or some further clarification so the applicant or the town staff would know what it is that the reason you're deferring and what needs to be done to help the committee members come to a decision?
I think that's a very, very fair and justifiable question to protect the interests of the applicant. And I would say deferred for the purposes of receiving further clarifications on.
I'm actually looking at, Bill, hang on a second here. I'm looking at the official plan, page 17 and 18, and urban area designations. And B1.1.3 is talking about residential intensification. And I would like to see something from our planning department that's more specifically related, considering proposals for residential intensification, the following criteria are applicable to intensification proposals within the urban living area designation, which I assume is the urban boundaries of the region. There are a number of things we're supposed to look at. Item B, basically, intensification and redevelopment are encouraged to achieve unit density in a housing type that is keeping with the character and density of the neighborhood. And this goes back to the definition of what is the neighborhood we're dealing with. And with Bill's small enclave, this particular part of the neighborhood seems to form. So I think I want more information on that. I'm also looking residential intensification redevelopment proposal located on lands which abut local roads maintain the unit density. I can see that. Then we're looking at the frontages. Okay? And D says, notwithstanding B and C, the creation of new freehold or vacant condominium infill lots, well, new freehold lot, which is what this would be, through consent process for ground-oriented detached dwellings, which is what we're proposing is probably going to see in the building, on the lot, may be permitted provided the proposed lot and unit type is similar to and compatible with the established character of the street or neighborhood where it is proposed. I would like you to tell me how and why your current planning report, to me, has not looked at this particular item.
Then I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that I'm prepared to amend my resolution, my motion, to say, to seek further information, including but not limited to, and you just...
Basically, I would use that entire section of the official plan.
Including but not limited to section B 1.1.3 in its entirety.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, that's B1.
B1.3, residential intensification.
So it's to include but not limited, so we can look wherever we want to look. But that is the focus of the deferment. Everybody understand? That's the motion.
So through you, Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I want to make sure that I have it on record correct, that there's a motion put forward to defer this application, B11, 2019P, to seek further information, including but not limited.
All three applications.
All three.
All three applications?
All three applications, please.
So that would be B11, 2019, and A28 and A29, 2019P, to seek further information, included not limited to official plan section B 1.3 residential intensification.
Intensification.
Thank you.
And
Is that
Mr. Law
correct?
accepts that amendment?
And I want discussion on that one too, as far as the
Well,
planning act. but that's-
it's to include but not limited
Yeah.
to, so we can look at anything.
Yes, I accept that amendment.
All in favor? Carried. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for putting up. I hope you realize that this is probably the longest meeting I have ever attended in my 4 years of sitting on this committee. And I hope you've noticed that we have tried to be aware of all your comments, and we're trying to look at this holistically. So thank you very much. Now we have to move on to the remainder part of our agenda. I will give you the 5 minutes to clear the room. Thank you very much.
Oh, did we get the petition of 20-some odd names? Thank you.
Oh, my God.
That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Yeah, I had to stop.
Thank you for your time. Yeah, I read all yours, I've had over, it was almost 100 pages. I wondered about how you could read it. And really what you do is you put I built a spreadsheet.
Yeah, what did you?
Okay, so I'm looking down the spreadsheet, okay, you commented about your character of the neighbor.
the microphones so we can all hear this.
Okay, Holly. Did you keep all this crap?
I did.
The microphones are on.
Hang on a second, wait till I find my
Mine's off,
agenda.
right?
No.
No, wait till I find my agenda.
Mr. Chairman, we're on item 8, adjournment.
Yeah.
All in favor?